$167 billion, and in 3 years that we have in the Republicans have had the majority in the House under the leadership of Chairman Hal Rogers of Kentucky, for the first time since World War II, we have reduced annual spending from year to year, each year under Chairman Rogers' leadership. And it's also, I think, important for the country to know that one of the first and most important responsibilities of the chairman of the full committee is to take that total spending number that's given to us by Chairman Ryan's budget committee, that $967 billion. Chairman Rogers is one of his first responsibilities is to take that $967 billion and, using his best judgment, to allocate or divide that money among the subcommittees of the Appropriations Committee. And it's a real tribute to this good man's commitment, a demonstration of his commitment to our men and women in uniform, a vivid illustration of the bipartisan nature of this bill, that with the help of Ranking Member Loy, that Chairman Rogers gave this subcommittee for military construction and VA allocation that enabled us to fully fund the request of the military and the Veterans Affairs. And it is my privilege now, Madam Chairman, to recognize the distinguished chairman of the full committee, Hal Rogers of Kentucky, who has done so much to save the nation's, our taxpayers' hard-earned dollars, and do everything that can be done to help support our men and women in uniform.
The gentleman
yield him as much time as he may consume.
From Kentucky is recognized for such time as he may consume.
I thank the chairwoman, and I thank the chairman for that generous introduction. And Madam Chairman, I rise in support of this, the first of 12 appropriations bills that I hope to bring to the floor under regular order. Although we received the President's budget nearly 2 months beyond the deadline, I have every intention of drafting and considering all 12 appropriations measures in a timely fashion and in the traditional open process that allows all members to have their say in how taxpayer dollars should be spent. So as we kick off the appropriations season on the floor today, we face some of the most challenging circumstances in recent memory: a tardy presidential budget, a divided Congress, the ham-handed cuts of sequestration, and historically low funding levels. Given our tight budget, my committee has and will continue to prioritize funding in areas of the highest national need: our security and enforcement of law. However, virtually all areas of the government will face cuts this year, including critical national security programs. Clearly, this is an austere budget year, to put it mildly. Our top-line number is severely low and billions apart from the Senate's number. It's my sincere hope that there will soon be a budget compromise that will undo the harmful sequestration law and give us a single common top-line allocation that we can work with the Senate to pass all of the funding of the government. In spite of all this, I want to reiterate my commitment to regular order. This is not a pie-in-the-sky endeavor. It's what our founding fathers wanted and directed in the Constitution. Under regular order, each of my esteemed colleagues in this body will have their chance to put their stamp on this bill, to have their voices heard and represented on these must-pass bills. We've got a lot of work to do in a very limited amount of time, so I suggest we get down to it. Today we're considering the military construction and VA bill, a truly bipartisan effort that this entire body can and should support. This bill funds critical Department of Defense infrastructure that gives our men and women in uniform the quality of life they deserve, including hospitals, schools, family housing. This bill also includes $63.1 billion to provide our veterans with the benefits and care they've earned for their service. Notably, we support medical treatment for 6.5 million veterans, including funding for traumatic brain injury treatment, suicide prevention, and important mental health care programs. The bill also addresses two of the VA's biggest problems, Madam Chairman: the disgraceful disability claims backlog and the lack of a seamless, coordinated Department of Defense Veterans electronic health record system. The bill includes funding that will jumpstart efforts to clean up the backlog and force DOD and VA to get moving on a system that should have been in place years ago. But this is not the easiest of budget times. While most of the funding in this bill is not subject to sequestration, we could not in good conscience let a single dollar in this bill go to waste. Every nickel and dime appropriated was carefully assessed to ensure these funds are used properly, efficiently, and responsibly. We took the difficult but responsible step to reduce military construction funding to offset the increases in VA spending, but we made these reductions without affecting military readiness or effectiveness. To make sure that our careful work in this bill does not go to waste, we've implemented strict oversight protocols, and we've included certain benchmarks to help guarantee that disability claims are not piling up again and that we aren't throwing away precious taxpayer dollars as we try to get this DOD-VA electronic health record system up and running. Before concluding, Madam Chairman, I'd like to spend a half minute here thanking the chairman of the MILCON subcommittee on our committee, John Culberson, for his time and attention to this bill and his dedication and perseverance, as well as the work of the ranking member, Mr. Bishop. This combination of these two gentlemen of the House, dedicated appropriators, have spent untold hours working with each other to try to come to agreement on the items in this bill. And it's worked. And it's a good example, perhaps the best I can think of, where we see bipartisanship in support of our military and our veterans takes place. So I want to congratulate Mr. Culberson and Mr. Bishop for a job well done. We thank you for your bipartisanship. Madam Chairman, I think this bill is one that members on both sides of the aisle can wholeheartedly support, to keep our military in fighting form and give our veterans the benefits that they have so sincerely earned, many of them in the loss of limb, some in the loss of life. So I urge our colleagues to support this bill, and I thank the gentleman for yielding.
The gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time, and the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady. At this time, I would like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from New York, the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, who, along with the entire leadership and members on this side of the aisle, are committed to this bipartisan work product in support of our military construction needs and our veterans.
The gentlelady from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I would like to thank our distinguished ranking member Bishop. I would like to thank Chairman Culberson. I would like to thank Chairman Rogers. I would like to thank all the outstanding staff for putting together a really good bipartisan bill. It's an important bill, and I know how hard you work together to produce a really good product, and we thank you. This bill does represent a reasonable approach and continues our long commitment to our veterans and our military facilities. It continues the bipartisan tradition of providing funding levels that members on both sides of the aisle could agree are appropriate, while avoiding contentious legislative riders that complicate passage. However, the Republican majority's refusal to go to conference to forge a bipartisan agreement on the budget resolution really is unacceptable. This imperils this year's appropriation process, making it nearly impossible to move all 12 bills. Instead, it is likely that we will consider in the full House only a few bills with reasonable allocations, including Milcon VA, while others are left in limbo indefinitely until we pass a continuing resolution. I'm optimistic that this bill has a good chance of enactment, as long as we don't attach any controversial riders, but other important priorities will assuredly suffer. While veterans programs are exempt from sequestration, $73.3 billion provided in the bill largely mirrors the administration's request and does not reflect sequestration, even for the portions of the bill that were not exempted. In fact, the differences between this bill and the administration's request are relatively small, an adjustment of $1.05 billion due to bid savings and other project adjustments, and the misguided decision not to provide $185 million for the requested 2014 civilian pay raise. If the Milcon VA bill assumes the sequester cuts have been replaced, why can't we join with the administration and Senate and assume it will be addressed for the other bills? On a positive note, this bill would better support our female veterans struggling with the trauma of sexual assault and those in need of prosthetics. It also continues to focus on the mental health needs of our nation's veterans. The bill, which takes several steps related to the shameful veterans' claims backlog, would hire 94... Time has expired.
Gentlelady, an additional minute.
The gentlelady is recognized for an additional minute.
It would provide $155 million for the Veterans Benefit Management System and $136 million for the Veterans Claims Intake Program to significantly speed up claims by converting old paper files into digital files, restrict funds to force DOD and the VA to use a seamless electronic health record system, and require the VA to provide monthly reports. We cannot accept any further excuses. The VA must make progress. This is a good bill. I hope we can avoid adding contentious and unnecessary legislative riders today. And I hope that the chairman from Kentucky's optimism about sequestration reflected in the allocation for the first bill is proven true. I commend the chairman and ranking member once again on their good work, and I urge your support.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Chairman, at this time I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, let me thank Chairman Culberson for his stalwart leadership on this important bipartisan measure. Let me also thank Ranking Member Bishop as well for his leadership and support. Madam Chair, many people in America want Congress to find constructive solutions, seek good answers, overcome problems, and say yes to our essential needs. While Congress is stuck in certain areas, this bill takes a bipartisan step forward in the defense of our country and in service to our veterans. This bill says yes in a bipartisan manner to meet our Department of Defense infrastructure needs and to properly care for those who have served us so well, our veterans. The bill spends a little bit less than the President asked for and a little bit more than last year. Projects that are not justifiable are removed, but others receive increases. And the bill pushes forward, as we've heard, a seamless transition of care when our warfighters leave active service by integrating their medical records and expeditiously dealing with a very serious claim backlog. I am pleased as well, Madam Chair, that my colleagues have continued funding for the headquarters construction of the United States Strategic Command. STRATCOM is an important force in protecting our nation from nuclear threats. Madam Chair, we need to continue to work hard and smart to reduce budgets while also delivering essential policy needs that are necessary and fundamental at a federal level. I think that this bill accomplishes that goal. Madam Chair, I think we also accomplished the goal of doing what is just and what is right. With that, I yield back and thank the Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves, and the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you very much. I get this time to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price, the ranking member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, and a distinguished member of the Milcon VA Subcommittee. Mr. Price.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my colleague for yielding. Madam Chairman, I rise today in qualified support for the fiscal year 2014 Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. I want to thank Chairman Culberson and Ranking Member Bishop for their leadership and commend my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee for a cordial and timely deliberative process. I have to caution, however, that this bill's relatively generous allocation must be viewed in the context of the overall fiscal year 2014 appropriations process. To get workable allocation for the 2 appropriations bills we will consider this week, the majority has drastically underfunded other critical appropriations bills, from education to health care to repairing and maintaining our nation's crumbling infrastructure. Earlier today, I joined with many colleagues to vote against the rule providing for consideration of the bill before us, because the resolution requires this body to carry out the fiscal 2014 appropriations process within the framework of the so-called Ryan budget, which doubles down on sequestration and will have devastating consequences as our nation continues its economic recovery. So the overall appropriations process is in deep trouble. But the bill before us gives the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs adequate resources to address several critical challenges faced by our military and veterans community. I'm particularly pleased the bill would fully fund the President's request for military construction projects at Fort Bragg, which is adjacent to my district. The bill also provides critical funding for the Department of Veterans Affairs to ensure that those who have served our country receive the benefits and services that they need and deserve. Our subcommittee paid particular heed to the ongoing disabilities claims backlog issue at the VA. The bill provides nearly $300 million for the continued implementation of electronic management systems and improved processing of both new and existing claims. I'm also pleased the bill provides robust funding for medical and prosthetic research, suicide prevention and mental health treatment, addressing unacceptable levels of unemployment among veterans, and pressing to end veteran homelessness. These are priorities, and this is a bill. I hope our colleagues.
An additional 30 seconds.
These are priorities, and this is a bill I hope all of our colleagues will be able to support, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Chairman, I'd like this time to recognize a distinguished and valued member of our subcommittee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Diaz-Balart.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for how long, Mr. Chairman?
For 2 minutes.
For 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I rise today in strong support of the fiscal year 2014 military construction, Veterans Affairs, and related agencies appropriations bills. Let me first, though, thank Chairman Culberson and your staff. You've done a spectacular job. This has been among the most inclusive processes that I've ever been involved with, so thank you. Madam Chairman, this bill includes almost $10 billion for critical military construction projects, as well as imperative funding for the NATO Security Investment Fund. Our bill fully funds the fiscal year 2014 National Guard and Reserve construction programs, as requested, by the way, as well as fully funding the Family Housing Construction Program. The bill also includes $55.6 billion in FY 2015 advance appropriations for VA medical care. And that's the level approved in the House budget resolution. It's the same, by the way, as was actually requested. It also provides targeted funding for various information technology programs to ensure that the VA can tackle the enormous backlog of compensation claims, something that this Chairman and Chairman Rogers have already talked about. These funds will provide the resources that the VA indicates it requires to meet its goals of ending the disability compensation claims backlog by 2015. Additionally, It includes stringent reporting requirements for the VA so the members of Congress and the American people can have direct oversight on the progress of the claims backlogs. The committee also included report language to address the issue of prescription painkiller abuse. This important bill also funds critical programs like the American Battle Monuments Commission, the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, as well as cemetery expenses, by the way, including Arlington National Cemetery. So I thank the chairman. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this very important piece of legislation that has been done in a very bipartisan way. I yield back, Madam Chairman.
The gentleman from Texas reserves, and the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you very much. And at this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, a distinguished member of the Appropriations Committee.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I've been concerned also as my ranking member and as the chairman also of the committee from a gentleman from Texas about the claims backlog that have existed with the VA. Veterans of all generations deserve a benefit that's easy to navigate and be responsive to their needs. But currently the VA is still experiencing a huge backlog in processing claims. As of May 2013, the VA claims total 843,000, with more than 2/3 that have been pending over 125 days. Currently in my congressional district, we're working with over 205 veterans, 60 of them from Laredo, 30 of them from the Valley, 115 from San Antonio, with outstanding claims from the VA that have been unresolved for 18 to 24 months, which is unacceptable and it's shameful. I am pleased that the chairman and the ranking member have done a bipartisan work to make sure that they can support 20,851 claims processor. Additionally, the bill has the necessary funding so that all claims filed on paper can be converted to digital files, making them more accessible and researchable. I also support the inclusion of monthly reporting requirements of the claims backlog, so that way we can put performance measures also to make sure that we get rid of this backlog. Finally, also, I know a good friend will be having another amendment that I support with them, that if the VA doesn't do its work, I think some of those bureaucrats should have their pay cut, because if the VA folks are not getting their, or the veterans are not getting their benefits, then I think the bureaucrats also. So I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for all the good work in this bipartisan work, and I appreciate their efforts to ensure that veterans receive their benefits, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Chairman, if I could yield myself just a moment.
Without objection.
I want to particularly point out and thank my friend from Laredo, Mr. Cuellar, and I have worked together since 1986 in the Texas legislature, and the people of the United States often read in the national press how we, Democrats and Republicans don't get along. That's just simply not true. Henry Cuellar and I have been the best of friends since 1986. Mr. Bishop and I worked together beautifully on this subcommittee. This bill is a great example of bipartisan cooperation, and it's a privilege to work on this committee, where we really don't pay attention to party labels. We try to do what's best for the country. And at this time, Madam Chairman, it's my privilege to yield, if I could, 5 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey, for the purpose, yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey, for the purpose of a colloquy.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to thank you, my colleague from Texas, for putting together this critical bill. I know that Mr. Culberson has been a long-time advocate of the best care possible for our nation's veterans, and I want to thank the chairman of the subcommittee for his continued leadership, and of course that of the ranking member, my Georgia colleague, Mr. Bishop. Madam Chair, I rise today to bring attention to the recent tragic events at the Atlanta VA Medical Center. According to an April report by the Inspector General and continued news stories, mismanagement and lack of oversight at the Atlanta facility contributed to at least 4 deaths. Additionally, the Atlanta VA Medical Center has admitted that the combination of a large volume of patients and a lack of appropriate tracking has led to patients slipping through the cracks. The mental health unit at the Atlanta VA Medical Center has been of particular concern and is at the center of these recent tragedies. Mental health is a critical component of care for our veterans, and as our soldiers continue to return home from war, we must ensure that they are receiving the attention and the care that they so justly deserve. I would ask that as this bill moves forward, Madam Chair, to the Senate and to conference, that the chairman and the ranking member join me and the chairman of the authorizing committee to get answers from the Department of Veterans Affairs as to why we have yet to see those responsible held accountable and what changes the Atlanta VA Medical Center is going to make. And I yield and ask that question of the subcommittee chair.
Madam Chairman, I would say to the gentleman from Georgia that both Mr. Bishop and I and the subcommittee are keenly aware of these terrible tragedies in Atlanta and the very critical and important Inspector General's report, and we intend to aggressively pursue the recommendations in the Inspector General's report and work with you and the delegation from Georgia to ensure that this does not happen again.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Madam Chair, thank you, and I thank the chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas reserves, and the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
May I inquire as to how much time is remaining on our side?
The gentleman from Georgia has 12.5 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Texas has 6 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Georgia.
I thank the gentlelady. At this time, I'm delighted to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you.
I thank the distinguished ranking member and distinguished chairman, and I know that they have worked collaboratively together on behalf of our veterans, so I rise in recognition of the important work that they have done and to compliment them for the work that involves fully funding the military construction, and certainly something that rises every moment that I'm amongst veterans. Just recently, as I was in a town hall meeting and had the Veterans Affairs Department represented, the question came up about benefits. And I was glad that the initiative that has been offered, all of us embrace it. All of us have been fighting to stop this backlog and to move this backlog forward. And now we see the funding of this initiative, and it is most important. I am also glad that there is a focus on jobs for veterans. I will say that we need to do more, because when you talk to our veterans of various wars, particularly Vietnam War, there's always the sense of lack of employment, along with those who come in from Iraq and Afghanistan. But I do want to raise the point of what we have deemed ourselves into. We have deemed ourselves into a Ryan budget that causes a great deal of suffering. A cap of $967 billion versus the mark of $1.58 billion that would be more helpful, that was produced by the consensus during the Budget Control Act. Basically, we are ignoring the suffering of middle class, and we are allowing the sequestration to run rampant over those who are in need. I can particularly say to you that teachers in schools in Texas are losing $67.8 million. Education for children with disabilities in Texas, $51,620 teachers. Head Start is going kaput with 4,800 children losing their seats. Military readiness is being challenged in Texas with 52,000 civilian Department of Defense employees furloughed. Law enforcement public safety funds, Texas will lose 1,103,000. And then we look at the United States and go far and beyond that. We're looking at the fires in the West, the devastation of what happened in West Texas, the tornadoes, and we see that we're losing Coast Guard, 25% reduction.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Fires. This is a crisis. We must, in fact, you have 30 seconds?
Yield 30 seconds.
The gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
This is a crisis not only in the making, Madam Chair, but it is a crisis that is going forward. Whether we're suffering from the National Institutes of Health or the Centers for Disease Control, my main concern is that the middle class is suffering with the sequestration. The Ryan budget cannot be deemed the appropriations cap as we go through this process of appropriations. There's a desperate need of responding to the middle class, allowing for the continuation of job creation, Administration, making sure that we do not lose $125,000 in Section 8 vouchers, rural mental health assistance, or community development.
The gentlelady's
financial.
time has expired.
We need to
The gentleman
go back
from
to the right
Georgia
budget,
reserves the
Madam
balance
Chair,
of his
and do
time,
better
and the
for the middle
gentleman
class. I yield
from
back.
Texas is recognized.
I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you very much. At this time, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Representative Farr, the ranking member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture and a valuable member of the Subcommittee on Military Construction Veterans Affairs. Mr.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Bishop, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on this committee. I've been on this committee since I've been on the Committee on Appropriations, and I'm really excited about the ability for us to respond to the quality of life for people in uniform and their families. This is the committee that helps the families with housing, with health care, with child care, with the benefit packages that the military allows. And it's very, very important because we also have the responsibility for the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's the only one stop in entire Congress, because the Senate has no comparable committee where both the responsibility for the active duty and the veterans are in one place. And you know, in this country, you can't be a veteran unless you've first been a member of the Department of Defense. So it's a continuum of care. If you add up the budgets of both the Defense Department and the Veterans part and our military construction, it's the largest of all the budgets that the appropriations does. So it's important that we pay a lot of attention to detail. We've got a lot of issues dealing with not only active duty military and their living conditions, but also conditions and serious conditions with veterans and the backlog that veterans have. I think we're on the road to solving that problem. California has the worst backlog in the office in Oakland, but the Secretary's been paying a lot of attention and putting a lot of technology into it, and I want to commend the Chair and the Ranking Member of this committee for the leadership they've provided in trying to solve it. I also want to commend I think the Department of Defense has the best capital outlay program. It's called the FIDUP. It stands for the Fiscal Year Improvement Plan, I think, something like that. And what it does is all the services, whenever they need anything constructed, they have to go in and compete against each other, so it's on merit. And then the most meritorious projects moves to the top of the list, and we've been able to take care of that in a very responsible way. I thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing
The gentleman's
our minute.
time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from Texas reserves. So the gentleman from Texas, Georgia, is recognized.
Thank you very much. At this time, Madam Chair, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for the purpose of a colloquy.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes for a colloquy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bishop, for your courtesy. I really would like to thank you, Chairman Culbertson, for excellent work on this bill. This is a massive undertaking. One aspect here that I want to focus on is the policies. The Pentagon has set its sight on good policies. Not only do our troops benefit, but so does the American public. Nothing demonstrates this more than the recent Defense Department's Unified Facilities Criteria, UFC 2-100-01. Behind this strange-sounding title is the Pentagon's installation master planning document for over 500 installations around the world, four times the amount of space of Walmart's. This document, updated for the very first time since 1986, has the potential to positively impact every military service member and their families by making our military bases more welcoming, more connected, and more livable. However, the UFC is only guidance for each branch of the military. In order for it to have a positive and transformative impact, we will need to see strong implementation guidance from each service branch. I believe that this is a priority for the Department of Defense. Delay and deviation would only serve to harm or set back our military families who deserve nothing but the best. As such, I deeply appreciate the opportunity to work with the Chairman and Ranking Member to include language urging the Department of Defense to provide an assessment of the progress and barriers to the implementation of UFC 2-100-01.
Will the gentleman yield?
I would be happy to yield to the gentleman from Georgia.
The gentleman from Oregon raises a really important issue that the subcommittee will look into and will work to address in some way as we move through this process.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves, or does the gentleman seek further?
I was curious.
The gentleman from
reserve.
I was, if I have time remaining, I was curious if the chairman of the subcommittee feels comfortable with working with us to make some progress on this implementation.
Of course, we will do all we can to work together.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this and look forward to making this progress for our military families. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back.
I yield back, yes.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Chair, we have no further speakers on this side. We're prepared to yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back the remainder of his time. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Chairman, it's a pleasure to bring this bill to the House and to recommend that to every member of the House to support this bipartisan bill to make sure that our men and women in uniform, as my good friend Sam Farr said, this is such a privilege to be on this committee, the committee that the only one in Congress that can assure the quality of life and peace of mind of our men and women in uniform and our men and women who, once they've served our country, move into the VA system, and I would urge the adoption of the bill by the members of the House.
Does the gentleman yield back?
And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. During consideration of the bill for amendment, the chair may accord priority in recognition to a member offering an amendment who has caused it to be printed in the designated place in the congressional record. Those amendments will be considered read. The clerk will read.
Be it enacted that the following sums are appropriated for military construction, the Department of Veterans Affairs and related agencies for 2014, namely Title I, Department of Defense, Military Construction, Army, $1,099,875,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Military Construction, Navy and Marine Corps, $1,616,281,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Military Construction, Air Force, $1,127,273,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Military Construction, defense-wide, including transfer of funds, $3,707,923,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia. Page 4, line 14, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $38,513,000. Page 5, line 6, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $38,513,000. Page 63, line 6, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $38,513,000.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My amendment would zero out our contribution to the brand new NATO headquarters in Brussels and transfer that amount, more than $38 million, to the spending reduction account to help us deal with our debt. This line item within the bill is the very definition of ridiculous. The U.S. is furloughing civilian military personnel and sacrificing our own military readiness here at home, policies with which I disagree. And yet here we are, sending millions of dollars overseas to build a lavish new headquarters for the international bureaucrats in NATO. Madam Chairman, the planned NATO headquarters is an unfortunate example of excess and waste. While every NATO member nation is cutting back on overall spending, the new headquarters remains on track as a monument to bureaucracy. In total, the building will cost well over $1 billion to build, and it's taken 13 years just to finalize the plans. If we are serious about confronting our spending problem, we must fundamentally reevaluate our priorities. We don't need to help NATO build a new headquarters. We need to ask, what are we doing in NATO in the first place? The Cold War is over. It's time to stop policing Europe and start worrying about our deficit. I encourage all members to support this common sense amendment to help us reduce our spending and to pay off our unsustainable debt. Madam Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I share my colleague from Georgia's passion and commitment to reduce the deficit, to avoid passing on this debt to our children. This bill has bipartisan support and has been put together very carefully to ensure that we're supporting our men and women in uniform, and I'm looking forward to finding ways to save money in other parts of the appropriations bill and in the parts of the budget that are actually truly crushing our kids with debt and deficit. It's the social safety net that has grown so tremendously that is causing the greatest burden on our kids. The Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, the growth of these programs has been so astronomical it's swallowing up almost all of our national income on an annual basis. And that's where we need to focus our attention, is saving those programs from bankruptcy. In fact, that's where we will really save the big money for our children in the future. Medicare is in such dire straits that if you're 54 years of age or younger, the Medicare Hospital Fund can only pay about 50 cents on the dollar of the benefits that have been promised. So the Medicare program, for all intents and purposes, for people that are 54 years of age or younger, is bankrupt. And the Social Security program, if you're 47 years of age or younger, that program is bankrupt because it can only pay about 60 cents on the dollar. So we've got to, as a Congress, in order to save our nation from bankruptcy, to save our kids from crushing levels of taxation, to prevent this mountain of debt from being passed on to our children, save Medicare and Social Security from bankruptcy. And that's what Congressman Ryan, Chairman of the Budget Committee, is working on. Congressman Sam Johnson from the Ways and Means Committee is working on legislation to save Social Security. And that's where we're going to save the big money. On things like NATO, we have over 600,000 troops in Europe. We have 127 military installations. I am no fan of the United Nations, but NATO has served a vital role since the end of World War II in preserving the peace in Europe. We've expanded NATO membership now to the former countries of Eastern Europe that were behind the Iron Curtain. It was NATO and the leadership of President Ronald Reagan and the resolute courage of our men and women in uniform that led to the fall of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Iron Curtain. But for NATO, but for that strategic alliance, we may still be facing communist Russia. Today the Soviet Union is gone, the Iron Curtain is gone, and many of those nations that were once in the Soviet bloc are members of NATO. So with great respect for my colleague from Georgia and his conservative commitment to balance the budget, let us focus on saving Social Security and Medicare from bankruptcy first and foremost is the most effective long-term way to save the nation from bankruptcy and to get us back on track to a balanced budget. Look for other opportunities to save money in our multiple appropriations bills that are coming up, but not at the expense of a great strategic alliance that has served this nation well since the end of World War II. And I'd urge my colleagues to vote against this amendment. And I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you. I'd like to join my distinguished chair in opposition to this amendment. I certainly appreciate and understand the gentleman from Georgia's commitment to reducing the deficit. The deficit is something that is undermining the economic foundation of this nation, and it is like a cancer that is eating away at us. And we have to do all that we can to reduce that deficit and get us on track to a balanced budget. However, I suspect that this amendment, while well-intentioned, may be penny-wise and pound-foolish, because NATO, this account from which these funds will be taken, supports a strategic alliance that has helped to protect the American people. Just over the last decade, NATO has been our strategic partner in the war against terrorism in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and our efforts to protect the American people and to protect us abroad. We simply cannot afford to turn our backs on our allies who have stuck with us and who have supported us in our efforts to protect this world from the bad actors in the war against terrorism. And as a result of that, I reluctantly oppose the gentleman's amendment while understanding and commending him for his commitment to a deficit reduction.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Madam Chair.
The amendment is not agreed to. Pursuant to clause from Georgia, seek recorded vote.
Yes, ma'am. I request the yeas and nays.
The gentleman requests the yeas and nays. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. The clerk will read.
Page 5, line 10. Military construction, Army National Guard, $315,815,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Military construction, Air National Guard, $107,800,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Military construction, Army Reserve, $174,060,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Military construction, Navy Reserve, $32,976,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Military construction, Air Force Reserve, $45,659,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. North Atlantic Treaty Organization Security Investment Program, $199,700,000.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia, page 8, line 12, after the dollar amount, insert reduced to $0. Page 63, line 6, after the dollar amount, insert increase by $199,700,000.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate your recognizing me for 5 minutes. My amendment was totally zero out the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Security Investment Program and transfer its nearly $200 million into the spending reduction account. The world has changed dramatically since the creation of NATO. Its mission, as stated by the first Secretary General, Lord Ismay, is, quote, to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down, unquote. I have a hard time seeing how this is relevant to our post-Soviet world and our post-Cold War world. In this modern age, and at this time of domestic fiscal emergency, it makes no sense for the United States to manage the defense of Europe through NATO, and it certainly makes no sense for us to pay such a large share of it. It's time for us to wind down our involvement in NATO instead of making up new justifications for this defense warfare. Madam Chair, our nation's broke. We have an unsustainable debt. We're spending money that is going to crush our children's future and make their future much dimmer than it is today. We have to reallocate our resources and put them towards what's going to deal with this unsustainable debt. We've got to stop this out-of-control spending. Both parties are guilty of doing so. And this amendment, though some would say nearly $200 million is just a paltry amount, when our soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines are not getting the finances that they need, and when Americans are struggling just to make ends meet, and we have an economy that is really hurting and jobs not being created and students not having jobs when they graduate from college, we have to deal with this debt that's unsustainable. And this $200 million would be transferred into the spending reduction account and help us to start, just a small start, to stop this out-of-control spending. It's absolutely critical that we do so. Now I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and vote for it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment and move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I oppose this amendment because I, of course, share the gentleman's concern about the debt, the deficit. As I mentioned a moment ago, the way we're going to save the country from bankruptcy and protect our kids from this crushing debt burden that they're about to inherit is to rescue Social Security and Medicare from their certain bankruptcy, which is just around the corner. And the Republican constitutional conservative majority of this House is working hard to develop legislation to save those two programs from bankruptcy, but this amendment would zero out the funding that the Congress has invested in the acquisition and construction of military facilities and installations for NATO. NATO has been a vital part of our nation's security since the end of World War II. We have over 600,000 men and women in uniform in Europe who depend on the resources that this Congress provides to them, in part through the work of NATO. We have 127 military installations in Europe that depend in part on the work that is done through our contribution to NATO. And if the gentleman offers an amendment later on the foreign, for example, operations bill to cut funding for the United Nations, I look forward to supporting that because I have no particular love for the United Nations. They vote against us at every chance that they get. We contribute the vast, the majority of money that the United Nations receives, and they happily vote against us at every opportunity. But when it comes to NATO, that's a strategic importance to the security of the United States. And while I share the gentleman's passion to cut the deficit and the debt, let's save it for cutting NATO and foreign aid. Other than for Israel, I'm wearing proudly my pin of the two Lone Star states, the state of Texas and the state of Israel. Except for our funding for the great state of Israel, which we need to preserve and protect, I look forward to helping the gentleman cut foreign aid and cut funding for the United Nations, but not for NATO. And I urge the House to reject this amendment. I happily yield to my friend from Georgia.
Well, I appreciate your comment, the comments from a dear friend from Texas. He and I have been involved in trying to cut spending in many ways for a long period of time. And I'll assure you I will have amendments in fact, I have a freestanding bill to zero out spending from the United States because I want to get the United Nations. I want to get the UN out of the U.S. and the U.S. out of the UN. And so that's to come. I'll promise you. That will be coming. I'll give you that, that opportunity. And you're exactly right. Social Security and Medicare need to be fixed so that our senior citizens and poor people have the proper help that they need, and I'm all for that too.
And that they paid into and are guaranteed and should be guaranteed.
Absolutely. But the thing is, we've got to cut wherever we can. We need to reorder I'm a Marine. I was deployed to Afghanistan last year as a Navy reservist, and I believe in a strong military. I believe in strength through peace, through strength. And we've got to have the strongest military in the world. I don't believe our military should ever be in a fair fight. We need to be in a fight that's overwhelming. But NATO is a relic of the Cold War. It's a relic that we need to look at. And when we have such a huge debt, almost $17 trillion, we need to cut wherever we can, whenever we can. And I think it's extremely important for us to reorder our priorities, particularly across the world. And getting rid of this money for NATO is a way of doing that. And I yield back. Thank you.
And Madam Chairman, the gentleman is correct. $200 million is a lot of money, but we have to preserve our investment in NATO. I would point out that the former Soviet Union is sending submarines into the Gulf of Mexico. The former Soviet Union, now Russia, is aggressively sending their strategic nuclear bombers pushing up against the outer limits of our airspace around Guam and around Alaska. So the Russians are no longer overtly and openly communist, but they are not necessarily our friends. They and the communist Chinese are aggressively attacking the United States in the cyber world. If a state of war could be declared in the cyber world, a state of war already exists. The communist Chinese have already attacked us and are at war with the United States over the Internet and in Russia as well. They are not our friends, and we, of course, are going to look for every opportunity to work together with them, but NATO is a vital part of America's strategic security, and I would urge the defeat of the gentleman's amendment and yield back the balance.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Again, I certainly understand and commend the gentleman for his commitment and his passionate support for reduction of the debt and the deficit. And I think that we on this side of the aisle join him in that quest. However, again, I submit that this amendment is probably one that is penny wise and pound foolish. We have an alliance with the countries in NATO. Those countries have been our staunch supporters in the Operation Iraqi Freedom, our efforts in Afghanistan, and of course each of those NATO countries has a developing presence of Al-Qaeda, just as we in the United States. So it's very, very important that we maintain that strategic alliance, and this amendment would cut our share of the responsibility for NATO, which we share with the other member countries. And I think that since we are deriving a mutual benefit, that we should have a mutual responsibility for support. It's joint support. And I think that it would not be wise for us to withdraw our aspect of that support. We should assume our responsibility with our allies for the mutual support and the mutual benefits. I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. The clerk will read.
Page 8, line 14, Family Housing Construction, Army, $44,008,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Family Housing Operation and Maintenance, $512,871,000. Family Housing Construction, Navy and Marine Corps, $73,407,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Family Housing Operation and Maintenance, Navy and Marine Corps, $389,844,000. Family Housing Construction, Air Force, $76,360,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Family Housing Operation and Maintenance, Air Force, $388,598,000. Family Housing Operation and Maintenance, defense-wide, $55,845,000. Department of Defense Family Housing Improvement Fund, $1,780,000. Chemical Demilitarization Construction, defense-wide, $122,536,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2018. Department of Defense Base Closure Account, $451,357,000. Administrative provisions. Section 101, none of the funds shall be expended for payments for construction where estimates exceed $25,000. Section 102, funds shall be available for hire passenger motor vehicles. Section 103, funds may be used for the Federal Highway Administration for construction of access roads when projects authorized are certified as important to the national defense. Section 104, none of the funds may be used to begin construction of new bases for which appropriations have not been made. Section 105, none of the funds shall be used for the purchase of land in excess of 100% of the value as determined by the Army Corps of Engineers. Section 106, none of the funds shall be used to acquire land. Section 107, none of the funds for minor construction may be used to transfer any activity from one base to another without prior notification to the committees. Section 108, none of the funds may be used for procurement of steel for which American steel producers have been denied the opportunity to compete for such steel procurement. Section 109, none of the funds for military construction may be used to pay real property taxes in any foreign nation. Section 110, none of the funds may be used to initiate a new installation overseas without prior notification to the committees. Section 111, none of the funds may be obligated for architect contracts to exceed $500,000 for projects in Japan. Section 112, none of the funds for military construction may be used to award any contract to exceed $1 million to a foreign contractor. Section 113, the Secretary shall inform the committees of any proposed military exercise if amounts expended are anticipated to exceed $100,000. Section 114, funds for construction shall be available for each such military department by the authorizations. Section 115, for projects being completed with funds otherwise expired or lapsed funds may be used. Section 116, funds for the construction of military projects may be obligated before the end of the fourth fiscal year after the fiscal year for which funds were made available. Including transfer of funds. Section 117, proceeds deposited to the department-based closure account may be transferred to the account established by Section 2906A1 of the Defense-Based Closure and Realignment Act of 1990, including transfer of funds. Section 118, subject to prior notification, such amounts as may be determined may be transferred to the Department Family Housing Improvement Fund for amounts appropriated for construction and family housing accounts, including transfer of funds. Section 119, amounts may be transferred from the accounts established by the Defense-Based Closure and Realignment Act of 1990 to pay for expenses associated with the Homeowners Assistance Program. Section 120, funds made available for operation and maintenance of family housing for repairs and maintenance of all family housing units.
Madam Chair.
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Griffith of Virginia.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a simple little amendment. Currently, any expenditures at a flag officer or general's housing on base has to be reported if there's an expenditure in excess of $35,000. This lowers this number down to $15,000. It doesn't mean they can't do the work. It just means that if they're going to spend more than $15,000, they have to file a report with Congress before they do so. In this day and age where we're trying to make sure that we're spending the taxpayers' money wisely, this seems to be appropriate. My wife and I put a roof on our house a couple of years ago for about $15,000. If they need more than that, that's fine, but make a report to Congress. If there's something terribly wrong with the flooring and it costs more than $15,000, they can report it. But most repairs to a home can be done under $15,000. This is just simply saying hey, tell us what you're doing so that we can have a more transparent expenditure and a more transparent government. And I reserve the rest of my time for any comments if necessary.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time.
Thank you, ma'am.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I'd like to rise in support of the gentleman's amendment, and we'd be happy to accept it. I think it's perfectly reasonable to report if you're going to expend more than $15,000. Certainly we want to help make sure that our officers have everything that they need, but it'd be nice to have them reported. And I'll be willing to accept the gentleman's amendment if my colleague from Georgia is in agreement.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? From Pennsylvania, sorry.
Madam Speaker, I rise seeking to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I just wanted to come to the floor. I have had the opportunity to serve on this subcommittee under the leadership of my great friend from Texas and our ranking member, Congressman Bishop from Georgia. And the focus of the work, this has been a bipartisan process to come up with the best possible set of proposals to move our country forward, to respond to our needs in terms of military construction. But I rise today in particular to thank the two leaders of the subcommittee, and in particular the chairman for his great leadership on veterans benefits. I had breakfast with General Shinseki, and the staff of the VA, I think, has been clearly moved by the ranking member and the chairman's insistence that we deal with the challenges around the backlog. I want to particularly note the great work in this bill on neuroscience and brain disorders. The chairman and I began some work together in the CJS appropriations process a year and a half ago, which has moved our country, I think, forward in terms of dealing with some 600 different brain diseases and disorders in a much more aggressive fashion. And we compliment the President on the BRAIN initiative. But right here in this VA bill, there is actual concrete steps being taken to deal with post-traumatic stress, to deal with traumatic brain injury. And I had a Nobel Prize laureate who's done work on TBI really come and just to say that the focus we put on this has been so important because some 40% of our injured veterans have some type of traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress challenges that they face. I've visited the Intrepid Center. So I didn't want this moment to pass without thanking the two leaders of the subcommittee for their work. I could go on and on about the Epilepsy Centers of Excellence, but I know I only have a few minutes, so I'll cease here. I want to thank them because it won't necessarily be recorded, but in the lives of tens of thousands of our veterans and servicemen, differences in their life circumstances will be made for the positive because of what's in this bill. So thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time, and the clerk will read.
Page 18, line 24, section 121, amounts in the Ford Island Improvement Account shall be available until expended. Section 122, none of the funds may be obligated or expended to carry out a military construction for the purposes of supporting a function that has been approved for realignment to another installation. Section 123, including transfer of funds during the 5-year period after appropriations for military constructions have expired, unobligated balances may be transferred into the appropriations foreign currency fluctuations construction defense accounts. Section 124, none of the funds may be used that relates to the expansion of the boundaries of the Pinyon Canyon Maneuver Site, Colorado. Section 125, except as provided in subsection B, none of the funds may be used by the Secretary to relocate a unit in the Army that performs a testing mission. Section 126, $89 million, including rescission of funds. Section 127, $49,920,000, including rescission of funds. Section 128, $358,400,000, including rescission of funds, Section 129, $50 million, including rescission of funds, Section 130, $16,470,000, including rescission of funds, Section 131, $45,623,000, including rescission of funds, Section 132, $50 million, Section 133, $4,668,000, Section 134, the Secretary may obligate additional funds necessary to complete the Explosive Research and Development Loading Facility, Pickaninny Arsenal, New Jersey. Section 135, $75 million. Title II, Department of Veterans Affairs, Veterans Benefits Administration, Compensation and Pensions, including transfer of funds, $71,248,171,000. Readjustment benefits, $13,135,898,000. Veterans insurance and indemnities, $77,567,000. Veterans Housing Benefit Program Fund, for direct and guaranteed loans, such sums as may be necessary. For administrative expenses, $158,430,000. Vocational Rehabilitation Loans Program account for direct loans, $5,000. For administrative expenses, $354,000. Native American Veteran Housing Loan Program account, $1,109,000. Veterans Health Administration Medical Services.
Madam Chair.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Seek to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As our veterans return home from Iraq and Afghanistan after 10 years of conflict, it's critical that they're able to get the care they need and deserve. Part of that care must be greater access to complementary and alternative medicine. Unfortunately, based on conversations I've had with veterans back in my district and with practitioners of alternative medicine, letters I've received, it's too often difficult for the veterans to utilize these complementary and alternative medicines through the VA system. Even though research is showing that a holistic approach to treatment, including complementary and alternative medicine, can make a significant impact, a recent survey conducted by the Samueli Institute, who shared their findings at a Senate Veterans Affairs hearing 2 weeks ago, demonstrated the effectiveness of drugless self-care and integrated practices for treatment of these conditions had immediate and long-lasting impacts. Many VA practitioners have taken note and are doing their best to integrate these practices, and many veterans are seeking out these services. Both, sadly, are encountering institutional barriers and limited availability. Given the steadfast commitment of this committee to do all it can to increase the quality of the care for our veterans, I would sincerely request the chairman and ranking member to address this issue as the bill proceeds through the process.
Will the gentleman yield?
I would be happy to yield.
The gentleman from Oregon again raises a very important issue that the subcommittee will look into, and we will do our best to address in some way as we move forward through this process.
Thank you. I would be happy to.
I agree with my colleague from Georgia, and we will look forward to working closely with you to be sure that we continue to address these vital issues. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the hard work of the committee and the willingness to work with us to be able to make sure our veterans have access to these services, and look forward to working with you to make it happen.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the remainder of his time, and the clerk will read.
Page 28, line 19, Veterans Health Administration Medical Services, $45,015,527,000. Medical support and compliance, $5,879,700,000. Medical facilities, $4,739,000,000, and shall remain available until September 30th, 2015. Medical and prosthetic research, $585,664,000 shall remain available until September 30th, 2015.
I move.
For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I move to strike.
The gentleman is recognized. Does the gentleman offer an amendment?
I have an amendment, yes.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon, page 31, line 18. After the dollar amount, insert the following: reduced by $35 million, increased by $35 million.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do appreciate the courtesy that the Chair and Ranking Member have evidenced. I appreciate the fact that the gentleman from Texas, we've worked on not only on these issues, but he's played a critical role in another issue near and dear to my heart, dealing with international water. And it's a pleasure to work again. Those efforts have saved countless lives abroad, and today this amendment, it is my hope that we can partner again to improve and hopefully save lives right here at home. I've helped organize, found and chair the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus. It's clear from our work that we find America standing on the precipice of discovery in neuroscience research that will lead to a higher quality of life for the 50 million Americans affected by neurological illness every year. Conditions in neuroscience have already dwarfed other areas of health care expenditures. And that's before the waves of baby boomers turning 65 at a rate of 10,000 per day for another 14 years are going to drive it even further. There are more people with brain disorders than all cancers and heart problems combined. And as society ages, this number will increase exponentially, as will the cost to the healthcare system and the economy. But the importance of neuroscience isn't just about the numbers. It's improving the quality of life for those affected by neurological trauma. And no one is more deserving of these breakthroughs than the returning service members affected by traumatic brain injuries or post-traumatic stress disorder. As stated by General Peter Chiarelli, now the CEO of One Mind for Research and the 32nd Chief of Staff of the Army, TBI and PTSD account for 36% of the disabling injuries suffered by soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. He is convinced, as I think most of us in Congress are, that we must do all we can to help our veterans because these invisible wounds have devastating and long-lasting impacts. The amendment before the committee is identical to the one that I and Congresswoman McMorris Rogers, who is my co-chair of the Neuroscience Caucus, offered and had adopted in last year's MilCon V8 appropriations bill. The amendment aims to ensure that the Veterans Administration continues to have the resources it needs to find innovative new medicines and enhance diagnostics for what can truly be termed an epidemic. The amendment does not increase or decrease any accounts in the appropriations bill. It simply requires that no less than $35 million of the medical and prosthetic research account goes towards post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury so that we can expedite the cure for active duty personnel and veterans suffering from the effects of brain and psychological trauma incurred during their service. The amendment, I hope, symbolizes a commitment from this Congress that even in the midst of sequestration and tight budgets, we will not yield on this critical issue and area of funding. Meeting with the neuroscience, I'm always amazed to hear how this one area of research often leads to positive but unexpected breakthroughs. Like, for example, in researching depression, scientists found out that Prozac can help stroke victims recover motor skills more quickly. The military and prosthetic research funds many critical areas of research with direct and indirect links to PTSD, and this complementary amendment ensures that these links are made, research is shared to everyone's benefit. It's a commitment to using resources in a way that allows one scientific inquiry to seek out other areas of impact that will lead to breakthroughs in TBI and PTSD. These items demand our special attention because their effects can so easily harm a soldier's family and loved ones if not properly diagnosed. Early detection and prevention prevents chaos, hardship, and indeed in some cases further loss of life. We must remember our duty to the wounded warriors who face a long journey to recovery. These harms may not be as visible as a missing limb, but can be even more damaging to a veteran's future. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, a commitment from Congress to our service members. We'll continue to do all we can developing new medicines and technologies to improve the lives for those in need. I appreciate the extraordinary courtesy of the subcommittee and respectfully urge adoption of the amendment.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. And the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Chairman, I have no objection to the amendment. I want to acknowledge and thank the gentleman from Oregon for his long labors in support of this important work to identify and cure these invisible injuries that many of our soldiers have suffered as a result of concussion, as a result of the circumstances of the battle in which they find themselves. We appreciate your good work, sir, and we'll continue to work with you. And thank you for the amendment, and we have no objection.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time.
Yes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. The gentleman's amendment would require that no less than $35 million go towards traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder research from the medical and prosthetic research account. I want to bring to the attention of this House that $32 million was already included for this purpose. And I do have some concerns regarding the amendment. I understand what the gentleman is trying to do, and I agree that PTSD and traumatic brain injury are the two major problems that the VA needs to focus on. Tens of thousands of veterans have suffered traumatic brain injury. Most are mild concussions that get better within a few months, but serious ones and multiple concussions can raise the risk of dementia and other problems. And the gentleman points that out rightly. With the tight budgets that we're facing, I am concerned, however, that where the reduction would come from. For example, this account also provides research for prosthetics, for women's health, and Gulf War veterans' illness. So I just want to make sure that the gentleman is aware that his amendment could cause shortfalls in other areas of research that are vital to the health care needs of our veterans. But I assure the gentleman that the subcommittee and the committee will work hard to try to make sure that traumatic brain injury and PTSD are adequately addressed with our resources available for funding research there.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Madam Speaker.
Parliamentary inquiry.
If the gentleman would suspend, we are currently on one amendment, so seeing no further request for time, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oregon. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The clerk will read.
Page 31, line 20, National Cemetery Administration, $250 million. Departmental Administration, General Administration, including transfer of funds, $403,023,000. General Operating Expenses, Veterans Benefits Administration, $2,455,490,000.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Gallego of Texas, page 33, line 5, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $5 million, increased by $5 million.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my friend and longtime friend, even from the Texas Legislature, Representative Culberson, the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Military Construction and Veterans Affairs, as well as Representative Bishop, the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee, for their work on these important issues. I rise today to offer an amendment to House Resolution 2216, the appropriations bill for the Department of Veterans Affairs. The amendment is for the brave men and women who have served our country and our veterans. It's simple, it's common sense, it highlights job training for veterans, helping them to find employment. Within the general operating expenses for the Veterans Benefits Administration account, this would support funding for veterans to become employable and maintain their jobs to meet the workforce needs of the 21st century. Over the next 4 years, 1 million veterans are expected to transition into the workforce from the armed services. This makes this specific account vital to the lifeblood of decreasing our unemployment rate for veterans once they return home. 1.6 million veterans call Texas home. 64,000 of these men and women reside in the 23rd Congressional District. These men and women have obtained tremendous skill sets while serving our country, and yet many have difficulty finding employment after they've completed their service. Nearly 700,000 veterans are unemployed. The jobless rate among our veterans is at 6.2%. Among veterans who served after 9/11, that rate increases to 7.5%. These men and women who have served this country, they put their lives on the line, and it's our turn to serve them. Let's make sure that Congress focuses on training our veterans to meet the needs, the workforce needs of the 21st century. We should make the transition from military service to the workforce as seamless as possible. And lastly, this amendment doesn't present any budgetary issues, as the Congressional Budget Office confirms that the amendment doesn't score. Additionally, it doesn't have a net change in funding levels. I encourage my colleagues to stand up for veterans' employment in support of a common-sense amendment. I look forward to working with all of you to get veterans back to work. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? I just want to, Mr. Chairman, say I have no objection to the amendment. The gentleman is absolutely right. We're all committed to making sure that our veterans, when they return home, are fully employed, well taken care of, and I thank my friend from the Texas legislature, Mr. Gallego, for offering his amendment, and we have no objection. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia, recognized for 5 minutes.
In support of the gentleman's amendment, Mr. Chairman, after returning home from the war, veterans are now fighting for jobs back home. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, last year's unemployment rate for veterans was 12.1%, a significantly higher figure than the 8.7% unemployment rate for non-veterans. Even more staggering, 19.1% of young veterans between the ages of 20 and 24 are unemployed. All veterans, because of their service, have basic skills, and the only thing that they're missing is formal job training to match their abilities with the specific needs of an employer. This is another issue on Secretary Shinseka's plate. I believe that anything that we can do to help veterans gain employment, we should do. I thank the gentleman for raising this issue. I support the amendment, and I yield back.
Okay. Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The sacrifices of the few, our military veterans, provide the freedom for the many. We know that it is our military veterans, who only make up just 1% of our population, provide 100% of our freedom. But far too many of our veterans seeking disability assistance that they rightly earned are running into a severe backlog at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Nationwide, there are close to 800,000 pending disability claims at the VA, and almost 550,000 of these claims have been pending for over 125 days. At the Oakland VA in Oakland, California, which serves the 15th Congressional District, which I represent, the constituents in my district have been waiting on average a staggering 552 days. Over 81% of the constituents have been waiting over 125 days. This is the longest average wait time across the United States. These numbers are a national disgrace, and I am ashamed that the veterans who have served our country, who have fought so hard, have to wait so long. Our military spends $1.8 billion a year, 1.8 with a B, recruiting young Americans to join our military. We spend it on NASCAR, Super Bowl ads. We send our recruiters out to our schools. to have our young men and women join the honorable profession of defending our country, but we're neglecting the needs of the veterans. We're failing to keep the promises we make after they serve. This weekend, I had the opportunity to go to a salute to new recruits who are going into the military. And I looked at those young, bright faces of young men and women who are going to go off to serve their country, and I told them, you are doing something that's very brave and very noble, but I hope that your families and you stand up for the benefits that you are rightfully earning, because right now, what we're seeing at the VA is shameful, Mr. Chairman. It's shameful that we would treat our veterans like this and not give them benefits that they've earned. So we're failing to live up to that solemn pledge that we've made to our nation's wounded warriors. That's why this bill is so important. It reaffirms our commitment to caring for the men and women who made the sacrifices to serve in uniform. It contains common-sense solutions to eliminate the disability claim backlog by mandating that the VA modernize the disability claims process, and it also ensures greater efficiency and accountability on the part of the VA. It would fully fund the President's requested budget to allow for an increase of the staff levels at the Veterans Benefit Administration. These funds would support an additional 94 claims processors, all of whom will work solely on disability claims, helping to address the heart of the backlog. Increasing staff levels, as we know, however, is not a silver bullet. Creating a more efficient, responsive VA is also necessary if the disability claims process is going to be fixed. Today, the VA spends on average 175 days waiting for the Department of Defense, the DoD, to send them a veteran's record, mostly because these records are still kept in the form of paper files. It's time we bring this process up and into the 21st century. In addition to moving away from paper files, it's clear that it would be far better for service members and veterans, as well as taxpayers, for the DoD and the VA to maintain one integrated system for electronic health records. This bill seeks to move the DoD away from paper and towards an integrated system that can be used both for DoD and the VA. It also fully funds the Veterans Claims Intake Program, which is working to convert all those paper records the VA receives into digital files. Mr. Chairman, the constituents of the 15th Congressional District, who served so honorably, should not have to wait 552 days for their disability compensation cases to be processed. Those parts of the bill that I outlined will help to improve veterans' access to the benefits that they have earned and enable us to better live up to President Lincoln's promise in his second inaugural address, to care for him who shall borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan. President Lincoln's words also happen to be at the core of the VA's mission statement. Words, however, are not enough. Congress must act swiftly to fix the VA backlog with practical solutions and fulfill our pledge to veterans. We must leave no veteran behind when they come back. We must make sure that when we say thank you for your service to a veteran, that we mean it and we follow up with a meaningful, responsive claims process. The funding in this bill helps move us in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Amedee of Nevada. Page 33, line 5, after the dollar amount, insert the following: reduced by $44 million, increased by $44 million.
The gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank Chairman Culberson and Ranking Member Bishop for their effort on bringing forth a good bill that addresses the needs of our veterans and maintains our commitment to providing them with the benefits that they earned and deserved. I rise with this amendment for the first time since I've been in this body because of the existing claims backlog, which is over 600,000 claims nationwide. As a member of the Primary Committee of Jurisdiction and the Primary Subcommittee of Jurisdiction on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I can tell you that in dealing with this number of claims, we are not making missions in the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I can tell you that the proposal to spend $44 million, according to the Veterans Affairs testimony in front of our committees, to clear 50,000 of those claims in the backlog is quite simply more of the same. That's about $900 a claim, and we'll leave you with 550,000 claims when it's done this year. I appreciate the opportunity of coming technology, but I can tell you this. If you represent a district that's in California, New York, Arizona, Indiana, Virginia, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Texas, Ohio, Maryland, another Texas hit, Boston, or Mississippi, which is the majority of members in this House, then guess what? You've got a majority of those claims in your district offices. I say it's time for this House to take action and say this. Don't cut a single regional office's budget. This amendment does not attempt to do that. This amendment says take that $44 million and allocate it for personnel in those 15 offices that all have over a year of processing time. And by the way, while we're mentioning that, I want to give you a quote that is from Undersecretary Hickey that basically says, quite frankly, we have a resource allocation model that doesn't make any sense. That's before the Veterans Affairs Committee. So let's try something new. Let's put the staffing where those offices are that are in need of it most. 2 of them in California, 2 of them in the Lone Star State. Chicago needs help. You name it. Let's try that instead of just doing what we have been doing. Adds no money to the bill and also does not take any money away from existing offices. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say this. Even though staffing at the VA's 58 regional offices has increased by almost 300 people since September 2010, because of turnover and loss of more than 2,000 workers temporarily paid through stimulus funds, the VA regional offices are severely understaffed. Overtime will not be the answer. At a majority of the regional offices, including those in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Waco, and Oakland, the VA presently employs fewer people than it did 2 years ago, according to their own internal documents. Let's take the leadership on this issue and do something that's a little different than, quite frankly, a resource allocation model which the determined Undersecretary says makes no sense. I yield back and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Texas. Mr. Chairman, you moved to strike last word. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Chairman, I have no opposition to the gentleman's amendment and share his frustration and concern, as Mr. Bishop and I and our subcommittee have done in this bill repeatedly throughout the series of our hearings to literally pound on the VA to get them to move more rapidly on this backlog. We have included, Mr. Bishop and I, in this bill, very powerful and strong reporting language that we're going to get detailed information on a level that we've never seen before from the VA. And in fact, later today, we're going to have an amendment from Mr. Kingston of Georgia that I will support that will hold the VA to the same standard as the private sector in either they meet their performance levels that they have set for themselves, or they will not be paid as they are in the private sector. You miss your goal, you don't get your full compensation. We are addressing this in a number of different ways. I think the gentleman's amendment is helpful and constructive in driving home the point to the VA that it's absolutely vital that we get this backlog disposed of, that we expect the VA to live up to the timeline that they've promised us, and that is to eliminate the backlog within the next 24 months by the year 2015. So we have no opposition to the gentleman's amendment, and we appreciate his concern for ensuring that our men and women in uniform receive the disability benefits that they have so rightly earned. And I would yield back the balance of my time. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is a subject on which we need to tread very, very, very carefully. As we all know, the VA announced that it's mandating the use of overtime for claims processors at the 56 regional offices as part of a surge aimed at eliminating the disability claims backlog. This effort is the latest in a series of measures that the VA has adopted in recent months in response to sharp criticism and to the cajoling by the members of this Congress and the public over the number of claims pending from veterans seeking disability compensation. That number, which was over 900,000 earlier this year, had fallen to 843,000 as of May 13th, with more than two-thirds of those having been pending for over 125 days. I believe that Secretary Shinseki should, and I believe that Secretary Shinseki is using every option available to him to make progress in eliminating this backlog. Furthermore, the overtime measure is on top of the VA's recent announcement that it's giving priority to claims that have been pending for longer than a year. I believe that the increased overtime initiative, coupled with the expedited claims initiative, will provide more veterans with more expedited decisions on their claims and will help us to achieve our goal of eliminating the claims backlog. I believe that this overtime initiative correctly shows that the Secretary's commitment is there to end the problem of the backlog. And so I think that we should tread very carefully in this regard, and with that I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Nevada. Those in favor say aye. Those in favor say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be reported as voting yes on this amendment. I'm sorry, I was distracted. I don't want him to lose his amendment.
That's okay. Mr. Chairman. Gentleman from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this item, I would request the yeas and nays.
Damn it, I should have.
Does the gentleman ask for a recorded vote?
Yes, I would like to do that also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on this amendment offered by the gentleman from Nevada are postponed. Gentlewoman from California seek recognition.
Mr. Chair, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill is one of the most important that the House will consider all year. It provides critical funds for military training facilities, improves living conditions for our troops and their families, and addresses the need of our nation's veterans. As ranking member of the House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee on Health, however, I wanted to bring your attention to a serious issue. As you know, the advance appropriations process ensures that the VA health care funding is not delayed by Congress's failure to pass the appropriation bills on time. For the past 3 years, the GAO has been required to review the accuracy of the administration's projections for advanced funding for veterans' health care programs. The report helps Congress evaluate VA projections for advanced appropriations and ensures the VA receives the funding needed for veteran health care. Unfortunately, this GAO reporting requirement is scheduled to sunset on September 30th. I believe this requirement should be extended, and a number of veteran service organizations have expressed concerns about this issue as well. As the bill moves forward, I ask the committee to review this issue and continue the reporting requirement. On another note, one of our most important obligations is to ensure adequate training and support of our troops. That is why one of my first stops as a member of Congress was to Naval Base Ventura County. For fiscal year 2014, the Navy has requested funding for several important projects at Point Mugu and Port Hueneme, including military housing, training, and maintenance facilities. This bill provides funding for base infrastructure improvements, but it is a decrease from last year and also below the DoD request. On behalf of my constituents serving at Naval Base Ventura County, I would like to express my hope that these reductions do not come at the expense of the much-needed infrastructure improvements at Point Mugu and Port Hueneme. As a VA committee member, I'm also pleased that H.R. 2216 funds veteran benefits and programs. It provides $43.6 billion for VA medical services to serve about 6.5 million veterans. It supports mental health care services, suicide prevention activities, traumatic brain injury treatment, homeless veteran programs, and rural health initiatives. It continues work on an integrated DoD VA electronic health record record system, the paperless claim process system, digital scanning of health records, and transparent reporting on our progress with the claims backlog for VA benefits. Finally, it funds construction and renovation of hundreds of VA health clinics, medical residencies, and nursing homes. Support of our service members, veterans, and their families is of the highest importance. However, we must be mindful of the entire budget picture. Like many of my colleagues, I am concerned that we are operating under inadequate discretionary budget caps that will not allow us to provide sufficient funding later in the appropriations process for programs that are important to middle-class families and seniors, such as education and health care programs. While this bill is not perfect, it does provide critical funding for our nation's military construction projects and for our nation's veterans. And I intend to support the final passage of this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady from California yields back. Will read.
3, line 16, Information Technology Systems, including transfer of funds, $3,683,344,000.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Texas.
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Is there objection? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Culberson of Texas.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today with an amendment to clarify the House Appropriations Subcommittee's intent with regard to the integrated electronic health record system that we want the Department of Defense and Veteran Affairs to adopt. This issue necessarily involves 2 appropriations subcommittees and 2 authorizing committees, Armed Services and Veterans Affairs. We have talked with our friends on the authorizing committees and agree that the best way forward is for language to be included in each one of these bills that conveys a unified position. I am confident that all parties in Congress and in the Department of Defense and Veteran Affairs share the same goal of having an integrated, unified health record. My amendment removes some of the specificity of the original House language but retains the reference point of an integrated record. This allows all sides to continue to spend more time to develop mutually acceptable language that we can carry in the National Defense Authorization Act and other legislation as we move forward with this bill as well, which clearly defines the intent of Congress that we will have an integrated record with its capability of helping our men and women in uniform when they move out of active service into the VA. We are unshakable in our commitment as a Congress to make certain that we solve this problem as quickly as humanly possible. I can tell you that the subcommittee, the committees of jurisdiction, the entire Congress is tired of the delays. We're tired of postponement. We're tired of disputes. This has to be solved immediately, and I'm going to continue to work aggressively with our colleagues on the authorizing committee and with our good friends in the on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, all of us together, arm in arm, regardless of party, from all parts of the country, to make sure that we get one single, unified, integrated electronic medical record as fast as humanly possible. So that's the reason I offer this amendment today, and I urge its support. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that this amendment reflects the apparent obstruction of the Department of Defense on the electronic health record issue. And let me explain to you how we got here. The 2008 National Defense Authorization Act directed the 2 departments to develop a single electronic health record system that will follow a service member from the time he or she enlisted in the military to the time they exited the VA care by 2009. However, after a number of management, oversight, and planning snags and snafus, and the cost estimates that grew from $4 billion to now nearly $12 billion, former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and VA Secretary Eric Shinseki decided to alter their plans to focus on making their current electronic health record system more interoperable. Just recently, Secretary Hagel, the Department of Defense, made the decision to modernize the Defense Department's electronic health record through purchase of commercial software. A recent memo released by the Department of Defense makes no reference to the integrated electronic health records, and it seems more of the same go-it-alone, stovepipe approach that has been favored by the Pentagon in the past. In addition to the Department of Defense's memo, it also made no mention of the congressionally mandated role of the Interagency Program Office set up to run the Integrated Electronic Health Records project and staffed by more than 300 personnel from both departments. Finally, by going the commercial route, I believe that the Department of Defense has opened up its latest electronic health records scheme to protest and subsequent delays. With all these issues I laid out, some still want to think that the Department of Defense should be free to do whatever it pleases. Mr. Chairman, paper is a problem, and we cannot keep letting service members leave the Department of Defense with paper records. Please know that this situation will be addressed further as we move through the process, and we support the gentleman's amendment. I think it is timely, I think it is necessary, and with that I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk that would strike Section 413 of this bill. Now, first of all, I have great respect, even affection, for the chairman of the subcommittee and the ranking member and their exemplary staff, Mr. Washington. But Section 413 of this bill, Mr. Chairman, would prohibit funds to construct, renovate, or expand any facility in the U.S. for the purposes of housing Guantanamo detainees. According to a recent GAO report, there are prisons in the U.S. that can hold the Guantanamo detainees as safely and securely as the security conditions at the Guantanamo facility. The Department of Defense and the Department of Justice both operate detention facilities comparable to Guantanamo Bay and currently hold convicted terrorists and other felons connected to terrorism. The GAO report, however, noted that existing facilities would need to be slightly modified and current inmates would need to be relocated, perhaps. But this would prohibit that. The fact is that I can't imagine that there are members of this chamber that believe that indefinitely detaining individuals at Guantanamo Bay for the rest of their lives without access to a fair trial comports with American standards of justice. Now, first of all, a few words about Gitmo itself. 86% of the Guantanamo detainees were captured in exchange for a bounty. A majority of these young men never actually committed an act of violence against the United States or its allies, and 5% were perhaps members of al-Qaeda. So let's assume that 5% were, because there seems to be some indication that they were, but 95% were not. Now, from a national security standpoint, Gitmo has been too easily used as a rallying cry and a recruitment tool for our enemies. For that reason, its continued existence really is a direct threat to our national security. Language such as is in this bill has constrained the President's options for closing this detention facility. President Obama still retains the authority to significantly decrease the prison's population, though, should he choose to do so. He could waive the certification requirements if receiving countries take actions to substantially mitigate the risk that a detainee would re-engage in terrorism. That would clear the release of 86 detainees, about half in the entire prison's population. Since Guantanamo was opened, the statistics indicate that about 13% may have become recidivists. but less than 5% of President Obama's transfers have. Military strategy often dictates that by releasing lower-threat detainees, you mitigate the risk of radicalizing more. We released many foot soldiers in Afghanistan who are far worse than the Guantanamo detainees. But what is most relevant to this bill's language is that 46 detainees have been designated for indefinite detention, either because they are too dangerous to release or they can't be charged in a court due to evidentiary standards. The President did establish a periodic review board, but the panel has never been formed. Frankly, the President should do that. But those detainees that cannot be transferred, I think, should be tried in civilian courts here in the United States. The problem is, given the limitation that the Congress has wrongly placed on such transfers, that can't be done today, notwithstanding the fact that our federal courts have tried more than 1,000 terrorists. The United States already holds 373 individuals convicted of terrorism in 98 facilities across the country. There are 6 Department of Defense facilities where Guantanamo detainees could be held in the United States that are currently at a combined 48% capacity. Okay, less than half the capacity is being used. Now, believing that they will never leave Cuba, more than 100 are protesting their indefinite detention the only way that they can. 37 detainees are currently being tube-fed. It's a procedure that requires a lubricated plastic tube to be inserted down a detainee's nose and into their stomach while they're being retained. They are then held in the chair for about 2 hours. The fact is that the President can't do what, Mr. Chairman, I'll wrap up now. The President can't do what he needs to do as long as Section 413 remains in this bill, and that's why my amendment would remove this restriction.
Gentleman's time has expired. Clerk will read. What purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in support of the efforts to address the increasing backlog of veterans' disability claims in the FY 2014 Military Construction and Veterans Appropriation Bill. We must do everything in our power to ensure that the men and women who have served honorably in the armed services receive the full benefits they have earned protecting our nation and our freedoms abroad. It is a shame that our veterans have to wait an average of 321 days to receive a response from the Department of Veterans Affairs after filing a claim. In my district, I have the privilege of representing the southern portion of San Diego County and all of the Imperial County in California. San Diego is the home to the 3rd largest veteran resident population in the nation. Currently, processing times have tripled in the area since 2009, with over 28,500 pending disability claims being processed and an average wait time of 334 days. As we continue to wind down our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, more and more men and women will be seeking the benefits they are owed. We must continue to find workable solutions for these heroes and their families. This bill presented today provides more than $290 million to help the VA meet its goal of ending its disability claim backlog by 2015. In order to meet this deadline, funds will be provided for the digital scanning of health and benefit files and for the development of a paperless process claim system. Additionally, $344 million will be appropriated to the Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs to implement a single integrated health record system used by both departments. Both of these measures are needed to speed up the processing and to modernize our record-keeping system. We must also hold the VA accountable for its results, and I am glad to see that the monthly reporting requirements on the process of the Expedited Claims Initiative for veterans is included in this bill. During the throes of the Civil War, President Lincoln affirmed the government's obligation to care for those injured during the war and to provide for the families of those who perished on the battlefield, with the commitment, quote, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, end of quote. President Lincoln laid the foundation for our moral responsibility to our nation's veterans. Let us continue to work in this tradition by reducing the backlog and the wait times of disability claims to the veterans and their families across our nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the remainder of the bill through page 59, line 18, be considered as read, printed into the record, and open to amendment at any point.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Are there any amendments to that portion of the bill? If not, gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment at the desk.
We are not to that point in the reading of the bill.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I've been instructed otherwise.
Yeah, but I'm going to start reading.
Could I ask of the Chair a clarification for the amendment that I have at the then I do ask for a clarification of the Chair whether the amendment that I have at the desk is now in order.
58. We're starting at 58.
Right.
Okay.
Oh.
The reading will resume at section 406.
Mr. Chairman, I have gotten that clarification, and we will wait until we're summoned next time.
And the clerk will read.
Page 58, line 19, section 406. None of the funds made available may be transferred except pursuant to transfer authority provided in this or any other Appropriations Act. Section 407. None of the funds may be used for a project named for an individual serving as a member, delegate, or resident commissioner. Section 408. Any agency receiving funds in this Act shall post on the public website any report required. Section 409. None of the funds may be used to maintain a computer network unless such network blocks the viewing, downloading, and exchanging of pornography. Section 410. None of the funds may be distributed to the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, ACORN, or its subsidiaries or successors. Section 411. None of the funds may be used by an agency to exercise the power of eminent domain. Section 412. None of the funds may be used by an agency of the executive branch to pay for first-class travel. Section 413. None of the funds appropriated may be used to construct, renovate, or expand any facility in the United States, its territories, or possessions to house any individual detained at United States Naval Station, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Now I know I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment after the gentleman sends his amendment to the desk.
I understand there is an amendment at the desk. Well, I guess now there is.
There's an amendment at the desk, and the clerk will report it.
Amendment offered by Mr. Moran of Virginia. Strike Section 413.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try not to take the full 5 minutes because I know we want to finish this up as soon as possible. I've already said how much I like the chairman and ranking member. Mr. Chairman, Section 413 prohibits any funds, no matter how small they might be, to renovate or expand any facility in the U.S. for the purposes of housing Guantanamo detainees. The fact is that the Department of Justice does have 6 facilities where Guantanamo Bay detainees could be held in the United States. And those facilities are currently operating at only 48% capacity. I believe that if we were to look deeply into this issue of detention at Guantanamo Bay, we would conclude, number one, that they don't meet the standards of justice that our American jurisprudence system demands. Number two, the people at Guantanamo Bay, the vast majority, should have been released. In fact, the vast majority shouldn't, of the 779 people that were put there, should never have been detained. Number three, the best place for them to be housed and then tried is in the United States. But number four, the continuance of the Guantanamo Bay facility represents an immediate security threat to the United States because it is a rallying cry and a recruitment tool for our enemy. Now, right now, there are more than 100 detainees that are protesting what appears to be an indefinite detention. The only way they can through hunger strikes. 37 of them are being tube-fed through their nose into their stomach. They're held for about 2 hours to make sure that this liquid stuff is digested. Guantanamo has become an immediate humanitarian crisis. It needs to be addressed urgently because the rest of the world can't understand why we don't do the right thing by those detainees who still are at Guantanamo Bay, who we have cleared, in fact, the Bush administration cleared for release because they had no evidence on them. President Obama has asked the Congress to lift restrictions on detainee transfers. He's asked DOD to identify a site in the United States for military commissions. He'll appoint a senior envoy charged with transferring detainees to third countries. He's going to lift the restriction on transfers to Yemen. He's going to staff the periodic review board for those that cannot be transferred. I think he should use the certification waiver provisions in the National Defense Authorization Act to transfer detainees from Guantanamo, beginning with the reported 86 detainees already been cleared for transfer. But he can't do what he needs to do for our national security as long as language like Section 413 is in this bill. That's why my amendment would remove this restriction. What we're doing does not comport with America's system of justice or with fairness. And as I say, I believe it's a direct threat to our national security. So, Mr. Chairman, I would urge that we remove this language. It doesn't need to be there. We have Department of Defense facilities. They're being underused in the United States, and that's the way that we could clear up a situation that we never should have created in the first place. At this point, can I reserve time in order to respond to Mr. Culberson if he...
The gentleman may not reserve time. Does the gentleman yield back?
I suspect him not. So at this point, I will yield back and anxious to hear from the chairman of this subcommittee. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this language is in the bill because it has strong bipartisan support. The American people do not want these terrorists, these criminals captured either on battlefields overseas or who have sworn to kill innocent American men, women, and children housed in American prisons. And so in the Second World War, Nazi soldiers, saboteurs, landed on Long Island and on the beaches of Florida carrying explosives with the intent of killing innocent Americans. Franklin Roosevelt, as president, when they were captured, they were held and tried in the military, and within 90 days, they were executed. The prisoners at Guantanamo Bay, quite frankly, are being treated much more leniently than I think they should be, than most Americans think they should be. And, Mr. Chairman, I rise in strenuous opposition to the gentleman's amendment, and I'd like to, if I could, yield the remainder of my initial time in opposition to my good friend, the chairman of the Commerce, Justice, Science Subcommittee, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Wolf.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you very much. I rise in opposition to my good friend, and we are good friends, amendment. Let me tell you, one, at the outset, in the President's first term, an executive order declared the intention to close Guantanamo Bay and bring the detainees to the United States. That proposal was rejected by the Congress overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis. Similar language is carried in the Commerce State Justice Bill on the committee, a subcommittee on which I serve. These provisions reflect a consensus of this and previous Congress. But let me tell you some of the real reasons why this is a bad and even, I would say, a dangerous amendment. Several of these men who have been released from Guantanamo have gone back into the battlefield and have killed Americans. Secondly, Director Mueller, and I don't have the letter here, but I'll give it to my friend, said this could have an impact on local jails, the locality, the jails. You remember the blind Sheikh Rahman when Officer Tepe was stabbed in the eye with regard to an escape. To bring people like this into the United States could have an impact not only on the jail, but also on the community. To bring Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to the United States would cost roughly, if you recall, $250 million a year. Moussaoui, who was tried in the Gentleman's District in Alexandria, it literally upset Alexandria, and if you take the same time frame that Moussaoui was tried, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's trial would go on for 4 years. It would cost $1 billion, $250 million a year. Do you remember when this idea first came out? Mayor Bloomberg said nothing, and Chuck Schumer said nothing, and then all of a sudden, everything broke loose, and Mayor Bloomberg came out against it, and Senator Schumer came out against it. Lastly, the Bureau of Prisons, we had to give Holder the ability to reprogram money because they were going to furlough prison guards. They were going to furlough prison guards. So to bring people like this in, to put this stress on the Bureau of Prisons, would be absolutely crazy. And let me just debunk another thing. For people who say, and I've heard the President say it, that Guantanamo causes terrorism. Guantanamo Bay Prison was not there when 9/11 took place. The blind sheikh who was involved in trying to blow up the World Trade Center in 1993, there was no Guantanamo. It's a hoax to say that. What you say is not true. It's false to say that bin Laden and people like, we're going to say, oh, well, the Congress and the administration, they're going to close down Guantanamo. We're going to close down Al-Qaeda. We're going to close down all the terrorism. It just doesn't make any sense. This is a bad amendment. My gentleman's a good friend, but it's a bad amendment, but it's a very dangerous amendment and would cost a lot of money and, quite frankly, we think would danger the localities. If you vote for this amendment, you better be prepared. What locality wants to bring Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to their local neighborhood? What locality wants to bring Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to their county, to the state? I say none. I urge a no vote on the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I would just also say that by bringing these terrorists into the United States, we would be giving them American constitutional rights, a very precious, very special privilege that's reserved for the people of the United States. These people should be tried in military court and treated as prisoners of war and the criminals and the cowards that they are, and I urge a no vote against this amendment.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Georgia.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
I stand today also concerned about the policy on Guantanamo Bay Detention Facility. And as I listen to my colleague and as I consider the speech from the President last week, it is very, very clear that there needs to be additional debate on this subject. I also understand that the House Armed Services Committee will be holding discussions on this very important issue in the coming days as they begin marking up the National Defense Authorization Act. And so I say to my colleagues that this issue deserves a more vigorous debate, but that this is not the proper venue to hold that debate. As I stated in my opening remarks today, this bill was crafted and brought to the floor as a result of bipartisan work and compromise, and due to the committee's commitment to our service members, their families, and to all of our veterans. This is a deeply, deeply controversial issue that I believe requires much more in-depth discussion than we can have here today. And I respectfully submit that this appropriations bill is not the appropriate venue for discussion and action on this very, very controversial policy. Today is not the time, and this bill, I submit, is not the place. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Virginia.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia are postponed. Clerk will read.
Page 61, line 15, Section 414. None of the funds made available may be used to execute a contract for goods including construction services where the contractor has not complied with Executive Order Number 12989. Section 415. None of the funds made available may be used to enter into a contract or loan guarantee to any corporation that was convicted of a felony criminal violation. Section 416. None of the funds may be used to enter into a contract or loan guarantee to any corporation that has any unpaid federal tax liability that has been assessed. Section 417. None of the funds may be used to wind down, alter, implementation of a program proposed in a budget request. Spending reduction account. Section 418. The amount by which the applicable allocation of new budget authority made by the committee exceeds the amount of proposed new budget authority is $0.
What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Gentleman from California was on his feet first. I'm sorry.
Gentleman from California seek recognition.
Have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment. Designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Farr of California.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a very simple amendment. As most members know, 19 states and the District of Columbia have enacted laws that provide for the legal access to medical marijuana. 2 of those states provide access to marijuana for more than medicinal purposes. In checking out the rules within the VA on the matter of medical marijuana, it turns out that there's a policy in force which is called Directive 2011-004 that specifically, I quote, prohibits VA providers from completing forms seeking recommendations or opinions regarding a veteran's participation in a state marijuana program, unquote. My amendment denies the VA any funds to implement that prohibition, thus freeing up the VA doctors to assist the VA patients in assessing medical marijuana outside the VA system. All this amendment does is make it possible for the VA doctors to provide medical advice to the VA patients on the relative pros and cons of medical marijuana if they want to have that discussion. For those doctors who wish to offer recommendations to VA patients or assessing medical marijuana, they are no longer prohibited from doing so. So essentially, the VA order is a censorship in those 19 states and the District of Columbia saying that doctors can't even have this discussion. Yet the civilians going to a civilian doctor can have that discussion. So what we're doing is removing the ability for the VA to enforce that provision, thinking that that's fair. This is a very controversial, I know, issue of medical marijuana, but in those states that have made it the law of that state, then veterans ought to be treated equally with civilian patients in being able to have access to the total array of applicable medical devices, including the use of medical marijuana. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California may not reserve his time.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Georgia.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman from Oregon. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate my colleague, Mr. Farr, bringing this forward. I agree with what he said except for one item, and that is that somehow medical marijuana is intensely controversial. What we're finding is that with the American public, it's no longer really that controversial. As he said, 20 jurisdictions, 19 states and the District of Columbia, have approved medical marijuana to be available to their citizens. Over 1 million Americans are people who are legally entitled to have the qualities of medical marijuana. And it's long been recognized that it has therapeutic values. They use it to deal with chronic paralyzing pain, the nausea associated with chemotherapy, symptoms of multiple sclerosis. There are many applications that are going to make a difference to our veterans dealing with traumatic brain injury or PTSD. Now, it is ironic that when we're trying to have a veterans health system that deals with the total patient, and this committee just supported an amendment that I had earlier to help give them alternative therapies, that we would prohibit a VA doctor from even discussing a therapy that is perfectly legal in 20 jurisdictions. What is the rationale here to prohibit the doctor from being able to have that conversation, forcing our veterans to go outside the system, incur additional costs? I think it is a misguided policy in the extreme. We're in the process now where the majority of Americans think that marijuana should be legalized. And if you ask the question, should we respect the decisions of states, that majority gets even bigger. Over 60% say the federal government ought not to interfere. But here, the Veterans Administration is prohibited from giving candid advice to people in our system, people who could benefit, like the over 1 million legal medical marijuana patients. I think that's inappropriate. I think it's unfortunate. I think we should do everything we can to try and relieve the pain and suffering that our veterans are incurring. And if it means having a conversation with a VA doctor about something perfectly legal in their community, I think that's the least we could do. I commend the gentleman for bringing the amendment forward, and I hope that the day will come when we provide this service to veterans who would like information about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Oregon yields back. Is there further debate on the amendment? The question is on the amendment offered.
Unanimous consent, I'd like to withdraw the amendment.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Kingston of Georgia. At the end of the bill before the short title, insert the following. Section A. None of the funds made available in this act may be used to pay more than 75% of the salary of any senior Department of Veterans Affairs official during the period beginning on July 1, 2014 and ending on September 30, 2014, unless as of July 1, 2014, the percentage of disability compensation claims that are more than 125 days old is less than or equal to 40%. B. In this section, the term Senior Department of Veterans Affairs official means the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and any Undersecretary or Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs.
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Kingston, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill provides $43.6 billion for medical treatment for the 6.5 million veterans today who use the VA. It increases funding for processes such as the electronic health record system and the disability claims process, the paperless environment. And yet, that's what we did last year and the year before. Nonetheless, today, as we sit here, the VA has 865,265 claims in their backlog. 66.5% of these claims have been pending for more than 125 days. The current claim to be processed, the current amount of time is 292 days. And some offices report some claims that have been pending for 450 days. This is not acceptable. But every year, we provide more money for the VA to process claims, and every year the backlog gets more. So what this amendment does is it takes a different approach. It takes an approach that's used in the private sector on a regular basis for compensation. It says to the senior members of the VA that if they don't have the claims backlog reduced by 40% by next July, the senior leadership will have a pay cut of 25%. And, Mr. Speaker, this follows their own goal. And all it says is if you don't make your own goal, there will be a 25% pay reduction for the senior management of the VA. And I think everyone in Congress has a VA office with problems in their own district. In Decatur, Georgia, a VA hospital that serves 86,000 patients in the state of Georgia has a backlog of over 4,000, or 4,000 patients have fallen through the cracks. Three deaths occurred over the past 2 years when the VA lost track of mental health patients and referred it to a contractor while not keeping close eye on them while they were supposed to be monitored. One may have committed suicide because he could not see a doctor and had an overdose of his treatment. There are other atrocities that have happened in that one VA clinic. Again, Mr. Speaker, this is not adequate. This is not acceptable. For our veterans, we need to treat them better. I'm a member of the Defense Committee, and I often say that the American soldier needs to have the best equipment, the best training that's out there, because we want them to fight and win wars, but we also want them to come home and live a normal life. So we need to make sure that our treatment of the American military does not end in a theater of war, but continues throughout the rest of their life as the claims or as the injuries that they incurred while rendering service to the nation haunt them the rest of their life. We need to be there for them for their medical treatment. And what this does, this amendment sends a very strong signal to the VA that we are serious, that this backlog will be cleaned up, and if not, there will be a price to pay. And with that, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. I believe Mr. Kingston has correctly identified the problem in the private sector. If you don't meet a performance goal, you're going to suffer a cut in pay. You can be discharged from your job. Mr. Kingston correctly points out that the VA set this own standard. They have set this goal of eliminating the backlog by the year 2015, and Mr. Kingston's amendment simply says that if they don't meet their own standard, their own yardstick, a measurement of success in reducing the backlog, that there will be a pay cut of 25% to the senior leadership that is responsible for setting this goal, that's responsible for leading the VA in executing this goal. And the Congress is, frankly, tired of the delays, tired of the excuses, and we want our veterans to receive what they have earned, to be sure that they're given compensation for the injuries they suffered in the course of service to the United States of America. And I urge adoption of Mr. Kingston's amendment.
Gentleman yield back.
And yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
I could not agree more with the gentleman from Georgia that the claims backlog is absolutely unacceptable. I think the chairman of the Full Appropriations Committee, the ranking member of the Full Appropriations Committee, the chairman of our subcommittee, and yours truly as the ranking member of the subcommittee have met with and have criticized and have done everything that we could possibly do to try to bring to the attention of the Veterans Administration and the Secretary the need to have this backlog addressed, and I do think that we address that in this bill. But I must rise in opposition to this amendment. When I talk to veterans, the number one issue they always have is the claims and the claims backlog. The number one issue being worked by my staff in Southwest Georgia is VA claims and the claims backlog. I believe that what we have done in this bill will finally do something about the backlog. Now let me just put a pin right there for a moment. The backlog, while unexcusable, does have some basis. Just a couple of years ago, this Congress, in an effort to support our Vietnam-era veterans, made it possible for the Agent Orange claims to be covered by the VA, even though that had been an ongoing issue for the 2 decades that I've been a member of Congress. As a result of that, there was a great surge of VA claims by Vietnam veterans, which added to the backlog. Add to that the returning veterans from Iraq and now from Afghanistan, which has added even more to that backlog, resulting in the now almost 850,000 claims, when 2 years ago, before the Agent Orange claims, we had just about eliminated that backlog. But I think that even though there's some justification, the backlog is inexcusable, but in this bill that we're debating right now, we've done something about the backlog. First, the bill fully funds the general operating expenses for the VBA, which will support 20,851 claims processors, which is 94 more than last year's bill, and all 94 of these new claims processors will work disability claims. The bill fully funds the Veterans Benefit Management System at $155 million and the Veterans Claim Intake Program at $136.4 million. These two efforts should speed up the VA's efforts to take old claims that are filed on paper and convert them into digital files that are easily searchable by the claims processors, thus speeding up the claims process. Second, we include a monthly reporting requirement for the VA to provide Congress with several statistics, such as the average wait time at each regional office, the rating inventory that's been pending for 125 days, rating claims accuracy, and month-to-month updates of any changes in those statistics. Third, we require a report on the VA's expedited claims initiative that was announced just a few weeks ago. This report should give the committee insight into whether or not the Secretary's new initiative is having a positive result. I believe that we should let the measures in this bill take effect before we turn to these more drastic measures. I understand the frustration that the gentleman feels and that is felt by most of the members of this Congress. And I understand the frustration that is felt by our veterans and even the Secretary, who is quite frustrated. And I'm open to all reasonable methods to solve the problem. But I believe that we should avoid measures like this. It's unnecessarily punitive, and I believe that the measures that we have put forth in this bill will adequately get results, accountability, and ultimately meet our objective of eliminating the claims backlog by 2015. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I'd like to yield time to my good friend, the gentleman from Georgia.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to say that.
Suspend.
Have we
Does the gentleman from Texas ask unanimous consent to strike the last word?
Yes.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And at this point, I'd like to yield to my good friend, the gentleman from Georgia, for any closing remarks he'd like to make.
The gentleman is recognized from Georgia.
I thank the gentleman for his the time, the gentleman from Texas, and to my friend from Georgia, who I know is just as fervent about us in terms of cleaning up the backlog. I would say the only part in which we're in a disagreement is this approach, and again, emphasizing that this committee has provided the adequate funding to reduce the backlog, but we did it last year. We did it the year before. We did it the year before that. What we are doing with this amendment is what the private sector does every single day. It bases compensation on performance, and we are saying if you don't perform to your own guidelines, there will be a compensation penalty for it. You know, Congress has reduced its expenses, depending on your committee, anywhere from 8 to 14%. We have not had a COLA in several years now. In fact, the only way the United States Senate passed a budget this year was because of an amendment that was offered called No Budget, No Pay. And the House passed a budget, too, under that threat. And one way you do get people's attention is to say, you have got to perform in your job or there will be a salary cut. That's all we're doing. And for the men and women who put their lives on the line for our country, that we could have this debate today and that we can go about our lives tomorrow and the next day and raise family in a free and independent, raise our families in a free and independent country, we owe it to them that a backlog of 800,000 claims is not acceptable, and we are tired of talking about it. This amendment takes the final step. We are going to make a change. We're going to get that backlog cleaned up. With that, I yield time back to the gentleman from Texas.
The gentleman yields to the man from Texas. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I urge adoption of the gentleman's amendment. It's common sense that your performance should be tied to your pay, and I urge adoption of the gentleman from Georgia's amendment.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Kingston. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentlelady from New Hampshire seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk and offer that amendment at this time.
Clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Ms. Custer of New Hampshire. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this Act may be used for any conference as described in Office Management and Budget Memorandum M12-12 promoting efficient spending to support agency operations dated May 11, 2012, for which the cost to the agency exceeds $500,000.
Gentlelady from New Hampshire is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is straightforward. It would prohibit the federal government from spending more than $500,000 of the funds appropriated by this bill on any single conference. This amendment would simply enforce the Obama administration's May 11, 2012 Office of Management and Budget Memorandum promoting efficient spending. I understand for the VA and other agencies to invest in workforce development, and I recognize the role that conferences can play in improving services for our constituents. But from the GSA to the IRS, time and again, we have seen federal agencies misuse public funds at conferences and make expenditures of questionable value. In recent years, this problem has extended to the VA. In 2011, the VA spent over $6 million on just 2 conferences. This prompted an investigation by the Department's Inspector General, who documented numerous examples of excessive costs and unnecessary and unsupported expenditures, including over $49,000 for a parody video, over $97,000 for unnecessary promotional items, and over $43,000 in awards paid to the staff managing these conferences. We can all agree that the VA should focus its limited resources on its core mission, serving those brave men and women who have worn the uniform and served our country. There are so many more worthwhile uses for VA funding, from eliminating the egregious claims backlog to improving support for survivors of military sexual trauma, to expanding access to health care services in rural communities, such as in my district in the northern town of Colebrook, New Hampshire, on the Canadian border. I commend my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for their support for America's veterans. Out of respect for our constituents during these times of enhanced fiscal responsibility and in service to our veterans, I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from New Hampshire. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk printed as number 3 in the congressional record.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Rothfuss of Pennsylvania.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today to stand with our nation's veterans and their families. We owe our veterans a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid. As public servants, we have a solemn obligation to ensure that our veterans receive the respect, support, and care that they have earned and rightly expect. That responsibility extends to employees and executives of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Unfortunately, the VA has failed veterans in western Pennsylvania and around the nation. This failure has resulted in the outrageous disability claims backlog and the unconscionable death of 5 veterans at the VA Pittsburgh healthcare system. In light of these unresolved problems, no one in the senior leadership of the VA should be paid a performance bonus. Today, over 865,000 veterans around the nation are waiting to receive disability benefits from the VA. Of those veterans, almost 576,000 are considered part of the VA backlog, meaning their claims have been pending for more than 125 days. On average, our nation's veterans must wait between 316 and 327 days for their first-time disability claims to be processed. Wait times in major population centers and in my district are often longer. For example, veterans must wait 642 days in New York, 619 days in Los Angeles, 542 days in Chicago, 517 days in Philadelphia, and 625 days in Pittsburgh. The number of veterans who have been forced to wait more than a year to receive their benefits has grown by more than 2,000% over the last 4 years, despite significant increases in the VA's budget during the same time period. In addition, a study conducted by the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review found that veterans who disagree with the VA's initial decision must wait even longer. That study found that it takes an average of 1,040 days for the agency to make decisions in appeals cases. That's almost 3 years. In fact, some veterans wait so long that they die before their claims are processed. The Trib Review study found almost 3,000 cases between 2009 and 2013 in which veterans or their surviving spouses died before getting decisions on their disputed claims. Western Pennsylvania veterans have recently seen even more egregious failures of the VA firsthand in the death of 5 veterans due to an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease. The VA Inspector General found that the systemic failure of the Pittsburgh VA to follow its own safety protocols and a breakdown in communication resulted in these unconscionable deaths. 4 days after the Inspector General's report was released, the regional director of the Pittsburgh VA was awarded an almost $63,000 bonus and presented with the Presidential Distinguished Rank Award. In total, the VA gave its senior executives bonuses totaling $2.8 million in 2011 and $2.3 million in 2012. Paying bonuses to executives of an organization with this kind of abysmal performance record is ridiculous. In the private sector, this level of performance achievement is rewarded with a pink slip, not a bonus check. Rather, This hard-earned taxpayer money should be properly directed towards fixing the problem at the VA and ensuring that our veterans receive the first-rate service and care they rightfully deserve. VA executives need to take responsibility, fix these problems, and do their jobs. I urge my colleagues to stand with our veterans and their families and support the Rothfuss, Roby, Tipton, Kelly, Hulskamp amendment. I yield to the gentlelady from Alabama.
The gentlelady from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to rise in support of the gentleman's amendment and just want to add, you've heard the statistics, of the number of backlog of cases. Each case represents a veteran who may have earned a benefit but is currently being denied because of bureaucratic delay. And in the last 4 years, the number of VA claims pending for longer than a year has grown by 2,000%. An award of a bonus should be a special recognition of success and accomplishment, not a right or a routine payment. Mr. Speaker, I don't consider a backlog of over 1.2 million cases to be cause for celebration or reward. I consider it a catastrophe that must be fixed. Restricting the ability to award bonuses until that backlog is cleared is a common-sense, good government policy. I'm pleased to support my colleague's amendment. It is a strong step in that direction. I yield back.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I reclaim my time. I urge my colleagues to stand with our veterans and their families by supporting this amendment. I yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Illinois. What purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to lend my support for the underlying bill we are debating today that addresses critical health care, housing, education, and employment needs for our soldiers who are deploying and our veterans who are returning from the battlefield. The Military Construction and Veteran Affairs Appropriation Measure is one of the most important pieces of legislation Congress considers annually. It provides the necessary funding to house, train, and equip our brave men and women in uniform, support our military families, and maintain our military base infrastructure. Put simply, no one should stand ahead of our men and women in uniform or our nation's veterans when it comes to making federal funding decisions. Critical to this discussion is the priority placed on investments in medical care for our active duty service members and veterans. I appreciate that the committee continued the precedent set in past years of providing advanced appropriations for the VA. Allowing for advanced appropriations provides a platform for long-term planning and investment in critical programs that meet the emerging needs of our service members and military families. I want to personally thank the committee for providing these resources that will allow our VA hospitals, including those in my district, to prepare adequately for the number of veterans returning home from deployment. This approach will provide flexibility to capitalize on emerging technology and treatments that will ensure our warriors here at home are receiving the very best health care possible. As well, I would like to thank the committee for its important work to ensure that we are maintaining investment in our military installations. I applaud the inclusion of $35.8 million for the construction of housing units at Naval Station Great Lakes, located in my district. This funding will allow more service members to receive the training they need while not overburdening them with complicated, temporary housing conditions. This forward-looking investment is one that illustrates how we can further utilize existing military infrastructure to achieve efficiencies in training and services. I want to again thank the committee for its work on this important bipartisan bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back his time. Gentleman from Georgia. What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Move strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, we are all outraged in regards to the claims backlog and the incidences of poor quality health services and safety. The current claims backlog is, as we have said over and over today, unacceptable. There's no question that the VA has failed to successfully deliver one of its key missions, to provide timely ratings of disability. Given this failure, it's hard to imagine how VA leaders responsible for disability claims rating and the claims processing transformation could warrant high-performance ratings and substantial bonuses. It's also clear that some VA health facilities have had serious issues that put the health, safety, and well-being of veterans at risk. This, too, is unacceptable. Where these failures have occurred, it is hard to imagine how the VA leaders of these facilities could have received high performance ratings and substantial bonuses. However, this amendment will not provide any solution to the short term or in the long term. It may have adverse consequences and compound the very problem that it attempts to address. Many VA workers are compassionate and hard workers. The previous amendment that was adopted, which was adopted by this body on voice vote, referenced models from the private sector by cutting pay, reducing the pay by 25% until the backlog is reduced. However, if you follow that same model from the private sector, bonuses are the converse of that, so that when those backlogs are reduced, and if there's exceptional work that goes into reduce that backlog by those responsible at the VA, then appropriate bonuses could be granted. This amendment, I submit, would make the VA a less attractive option than other agencies when it comes to recruiting and retaining quality executive leaders, and it will not have the very talent it needs to solve the problems that it faces today, like the claims backlog and the health care deficiencies. Furthermore, the SES pay and bonuses are governed by Title V of the United States Code and administered by the Office of Personnel Management. Any change to Title V to address VA would then also apply to all other federal agencies. Attempting an across-the-board, one-size-fits-all fix will penalize those who are dedicated VA executives who are working hard and well to find solutions to the VA's problems. So I would urge our colleagues to vote no on this amendment. That's the Rothfuss amendment, not because we don't have the challenges and the obligation to eliminate this backlog and to do it forthwith, but because I think that we are going a little bit too far in attempting to create a disincentive for people not solving this backlog. I think that recruitment and retention for people in the VA, talented people, talented executives who can effectively solve the challenges that we face, like eliminating the backlog, will be undermined if this amendment should become law. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back. For purposes, the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition.
I move strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It won't take quite that long, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit about this amendment. And I've always thought bonuses and performance awards to employees should only be given out to those who go above and beyond the expectations laid out in the job description. An end-of-the-year bonus should never be an assumed addition to an employee's paycheck. But the Department of Veteran Affairs apparently takes a very different approach to performance awards for many of their employees, particularly top-level administrators and supervisors. As a member of the VA Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, we have held multiple hearings on the mismanagement and negligence of federal employees at the VA. And what's worse, many of these individuals have been rewarded for their behavior. We're all aware of the situation at the VA Pittsburgh healthcare system and the outbreak of Legionnaire's disease. But how many of us know that the individual in charge received a bonus for the very year that we potentially had 5 deaths from that outbreak that could have been prevented? Another hearing conducted by our Oversight Investigations Committee, I recently asked a VA bureaucrat who had missed deadlines and overspent on VA construction projects of over $1 billion to explain why he deserved $55,000 in bonuses. In our exchange, he had no idea, claimed to have no idea why he received this bonus, and actually neither did I, Mr. Chairman. And just earlier this afternoon, and much more troubling, we had another VA oversight hearing where it was revealed that potentially up to 20 million veterans records have been hacked and perhaps accessed by foreign state actors, and the individual in charge of the security during these last 4 years where this apparently occurred has received over $87,000 in bonuses. This has become a trend within the VA department, and I believe taxpayer dollars would be better directed towards protecting the sensitive records of our veterans and their dependents and improving veteran health care options. I support this amendment, and I'm glad my colleague from Pennsylvania has offered that. I yield back.
Gentleman from Kansas yields back.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I want to express my support for this amendment and urge its adoption. Share the intense frustration.
Does the gentleman move to strike the last word?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to express my support for this amendment, share the gentleman's intense frustration with the VA for the failure to meet their own guidelines, their own deadlines for eliminating the backlog, and urge the adoption of the amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Move adoption.
Gentleman from Florida seek recognition.
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk, Grayson number 1.
There's an amendment pending before the House. Gentleman suspend. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida now seek recognition?
I still have an amendment at the desk.
And
It's Grayson number 1.
Amendment offered by Mr. Grayson of Florida. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following new section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to enter into a contract with any offeror or any of its principals if the offeror
Mr. Chairman, I move to waive the reading.
Is there objection? Without objection, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Grayson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This amendment strengthens existing provisions in the bill by preventing the award of contracts of money allocated under this bill to offerors or principals of offerors who within the 3-year period preceding the offer have been evicted or had a civil judgment rendered against them for such action as fraud, theft, bribery, making false statements, tax evasion, and so on. It would be unconscionable, Mr. Chairman, if we allowed taxpayer money to be given to contractors who have been convicted of such things as bribery, and therefore I offer this amendment to prevent that. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Grayson. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Thank you.
What purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Runyon of New Jersey. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following new section. Section 419. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to propose, plan for, or execute a new or additional base realignment and closure round.
Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Runyon, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment states that none of the funds made available by this act may be used to propose, plan, or execute a new or an additional round of base realignment and closure, otherwise known as BRAC. We all recognize that the budget pressures we face, a round of BRAC closures now will entail a large upfront cost. We should direct these limited dollars to addressing the current mission and readiness needs supporting our warfighters. For that reason, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, which helps ensure these funds address current needs. I know that many members of this chamber want Congress to continue to have oversight of our base and force structure, and my amendment ensures that we do so. I thank the chairman and members of the subcommittee for working with me on this important amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey yields back his time. Gentleman from Texas.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to express my support for the gentleman's amendment and urge its adoption by the House. And yield.
Offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment number 1 at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Murphy of Florida. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to award any contract in an amount greater than $1 million for which the Department of Defense did not receive at least 2 offers.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to offer an amendment to the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill that would boost competitive bidding across defense construction projects. The Department of Defense manages hundreds of billions of dollars in contracts each year, 43% of which are non-competitively awarded. The Government Accountability Office has reported that the Department of Defense does not keep accurate records of which contracts received multiple bids or why sole source contracts are awarded. This is not good government. Competition works because it drives down cost while giving consumers greater choice. It is the cornerstone of our free market economy and needs to be integrated throughout the government. I recently introduced the SAVE Act with my colleague, Rep. David Joyce from Ohio, to root out wasteful and duplicative government spending. The bipartisan legislation, which would implement several common sense solutions outlined by the GAO to reduce up to $200 billion in spending over the next 10 years. One of the 11 measures in my bill encourages the robust use of competitive bidding to reduce contract costs across all agencies. Today's amendment is an extension of the SAVE Act. It would prevent the Department of Defense from spending the taxpayers' monies on contracts over $1 million that has not received at least 2 competitive bids. With the national debt currently at almost $17 trillion and the current deficit over $600 billion annually, it is clear that we must rein in government spending, but we must do it in a strategic way, cutting programs that are wasteful, duplicative, or ineffective, and this amendment would do just that. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this common sense and cost-saving amendment. I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Terry of Nebraska. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following new section.
Unanimous consent to waive the reading.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the Terry amendment requests that none of the funds made available by this act, including the funds made available for the construction and major projects account, be used to increase funding for any major medical facility project that is under construction as of the date of enactment of this act. A major medical facility project, as defined by Section 8104 of Title 38 in the U.S. Code, is a project that involves a total expenditure of more than $10 million. This includes the cost overruns of new VA hospitals. Take the new VA hospital in New Orleans. That was originally supposed to cost $625 million, but a new GAO report shows that the cost overruns at this particular facility is $370, pushing that to a near billion-dollar hospital. The Navy Times recently reported about a GAO report that clearly illustrates this problem and should greatly disturb everyone. The Government Accountability Office found that the VA hospital construction projects in Denver, Las Vegas, New Orleans, and Orlando are, on average, experiencing delays of 35 months and cost overruns of around $366 million. This comes out to about, with the expected costs and the overruns, almost $1 billion per hospital. My amendment is designed to stop these cost overruns. In the Omaha metropolitan area, eastern Nebraska and western Iowa, there's about 112,000 underserved veterans in Omaha that are all too familiar with the cost overruns and delays associated with the building of VA hospitals. We have a 70-year-old, almost 70-year-old facility in Omaha that is in dire need of replacement. The infrastructure is decrepit, it's rusting away, the HVA system is so poor that we can't use many of the rooms, and then on top of that, our 7 operating rooms have been shut down recently. Unfortunately, there's no telling when the VA is going to get to it. The veterans in Omaha are being told that there's no money left. This isn't just Omaha. This is occurring in California, Texas, and all over the world. This is unfair to the seniors to have this level of cost overruns and mismanagement. So that's the purpose and reason behind this amendment, is to start making them focus on the bidding process, do it right, and not simply just have a bid and then make all the additions and changes afterwards that drive up the costs. And so I urge support for this amendment.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr.
I
Chairman?
yield back. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Move to strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I would rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. I share his concerns, and that's why in Section 227 of our bill we included language. It's very similar, and I look forward to supporting the gentleman's amendment and then working with him in conference to make sure there's no duplication. The committee is also concerned about increases in cost beyond that originally specified in the project, and that's why we included this section and why I welcome the gentleman's amendment and urge its adoption.
Gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Nebraska. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Engel of New York. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used by the Department of Defense or the Department of Veterans Affairs to lease or purchase new light-duty vehicles for any executive fleet or for an agency's fleet inventory, except in accordance with Presidential Memorandum, Federal Fleet Performance, dated May 24, 2011.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On May 24, 2011, President Obama issued a memorandum on federal fleet performance that requires all new light-duty vehicles in the federal fleet to be alternate fuel vehicles, such as hybrid, electric, natural gas, or biofuel, by December 31, 2015. My amendment echoes the presidential memorandum by prohibiting funds in the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs and Related Agencies Appropriations Act from being used to lease or purchase new light-duty vehicles except in accord with the President's memorandum. Our transportation sector is by far the biggest reason we send $600 billion per year to hostile nations to pay for oil at ever-increasing costs. But America does not need to be dependent on foreign sources of oil for transportation fuel. Alternative technologies exist today that, when implemented broadly, will allow any alternative fuel to be used in America's automotive fleet. The federal government operates the largest fleet of light-duty vehicles in America. According to the GSA, there are over 660,000 vehicles in the federal fleet, with over 14,000 being used by the Department of Veterans Affairs. By supporting a diverse array of vehicle technologies in our federal fleet, we will encourage development of domestic energy resources, including biomass, natural gas, agricultural waste, hydrogen, renewable electricity, methanol, and ethanol. Expanding the role these energy sources play in our transportation economy will help break the leverage over Americans held by foreign government-controlled oil companies and will increase our nation's domestic security and protect consumers from price spikes and shortages in the world oil markets. And let me say that the gentlewoman from Florida Congresswoman Ross Layton and I have a bill that would mandate that by a certain date all vehicles made in America would be flex fuel vehicles. It would cost $100 or even less to make each vehicle flex fuel, and other countries have it. America should not be behind other countries, and we will be introducing that legislation shortly. So I ask that my colleagues support the Engel Amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York yields back his time. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Tipton of Colorado. Add at the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. The amounts otherwise provided by this act are revised by reducing the amount made available for Department of Veterans Affairs, Departmental Administration, General Administration, and increasing the amount made available for Department of Veterans Affairs, Departmental Administration, Information Technology Systems by $10 million.
The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today with an amendment to reduce wasteful spending by the Department of Veterans Affairs on conferences and use the money to be able to assist the VA backlog in processing disability claims for veterans. Two-thirds of all veterans who file disability claims with the VA must wait longer than 125 days to be able to receive their benefits. I've seen this firsthand from constituents in my district. People have contacted my office to share exasperation by the lack of response and endless delays by the VA in processing their claims. Thing is, this isn't a statistic we're talking about. This is literally people's lives. Many of the veterans on the backlog are in desperate need of care that has been delayed by needless lack of bureaucratic backlogs in the Department of Veterans Affairs. This is deplorable, Mr. Chairman. The VA backlog has grown by over 2,000% over the last 4 years, despite an increase in the VA budget of more than 20%. As of March 2008 of this year, the VA reported that there are over 606,000 backlogged claims and 865,989 total claims. Nearly 900,000 veterans who have sacrificed for our country are not getting their benefits. They are not getting the care that they need. Our veterans deserve better. Despite the inability of the VA to be able to process claims in a timely manner, the agency continues to waste money on necessary conferences. In September of 2012, the VA Officer of the Inspector General released a report highlighting numerous abuses and expenditures by the VA at conferences. That report included numerous troubling findings. According to the report of the VA, they spent more than $6.1 million on 2 human resource conferences in Orlando and nearly $100,000 on necessary promotional items like bags, pens, and water bottles. In addition to these examples, the report concluded the information on many more instances of waste, fraud, and abuse at the VA. Following the release of the OIG report, Congressman Jeff Miller, chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, stated it can be reasonably concluded that 10 to 15% of the VA conference spending is wasteful, amounting to $10 to $15 million a year, at least. I wholeheartedly agree with Chairman Miller. That is why today I'm proposing this amendment to target $10 million in wasteful spending on conferences from the Secretary's $403 million budget and reprioritize these funds to be able to assist with and address the VA backlog. It is time that the VA focus their efforts on serving our veterans and processing their claims in a reasonable amount of time, not in 125 days or more. The VA must reduce the backlog, and it won't get it done by wasting time and taxpayer dollars at conferences. It's time that the benefits work for our veterans rather than our veterans having to be able to work for their benefits. I urge my colleagues to be able to support this common sense amendment. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chair, I have amendment number 2 at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Murphy of Florida. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following new section, Section 419. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to maintain or improve Department of Defense real property with a 0% utilization rate according to the Department's Real Property Inventory Database, except in the case of maintenance of an historic property as required by the National Historic Preservation Act, 16 U.S. Code 470 et sequitur, or maintenance to prevent a negative environmental impact as required by the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, 42 United States Code 4321 et sequitur.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise today to offer an amendment to the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill that would eliminate wasteful spending of unused facilities, which would save tens of millions of dollars in fiscal year 2014 alone. The Department of Defense has hundreds, possibly thousands, of buildings and structures that it has rated at 0% utilization. This is an incredible number of useless facilities the Department of Defense is paying to maintain. Federal agencies as a whole must do a better job at managing their facilities. Taxpayers cannot continue paying for unused and underused buildings while the nation is at record debt levels. That is not good government, and that is not smart spending. That is why I joined with Rep. David Joyce of Ohio and to introduce the SAVE Act to root out $200 billion in wasteful and duplicative government spending over the next 10 years. This amendment is an extension of one of the 11 common-sense solutions included in the bipartisan SAVE Act, preventing the Department of Defense from spending money on facilities that the Department itself has rated at 0% utilization. Mr. Speaker, we all agree that we must rein in government spending, and the best place to start is by rooting out waste. My amendment is a common-sense solution to do just that, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this amendment. I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida yields back his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Murphy. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word and enter into colloquy with the gentleman from Georgia, the ranking member of the committee.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The President's budget request included $3.6 million for the Special Operation Boat Docks in Key West, Florida. These improvements will help ensure that the Special Forces Underwater Operations School, which trains more than 300 service members and conducts support training for troops preparing for deployment, can continue to meet its critical role in our nation's defense. The Appropriations Committee recommended no funds for the project. As I understand it, the subcommittee made that recommendation with no prejudice against the boat dock project. Having determined that the Army had sufficient military construction funds available to complete the project without additional appropriations, the committee recommended no additional funds to undertake the project. I would yield to my friend from Georgia to ask if it is a fair characterization of the committee's recommendations.
Thank you. I would agree with the gentleman from Florida. The Army does have sufficient funds in bid savings and in unobligated balances from prior military construction appropriations to undertake a $3.6 million project. And I'd be happy to work with the gentleman to see if the Army would use those existing funds on this project.
I thank the gentleman, and I look forward to working with him. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Florida yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk report.
Amendment offered by Mr. King of Iowa. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section 419. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to implement, administer, or enforce the prevailing wage requirements in Subchapter 4 of Chapter 31 of Title 40 United States Code, commonly referred to as the Davis-Bacon Act.
The gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate being recognized, and I bring this amendment to the floor out of a sense of fiscal responsibility and a sense of duty to the people that go out and work hard every day and return a value for every dollar, for every hour they invest, a value returned on the production. I have spent my life in the construction industry. We have paid Davis-Bacon wage scales, I believe, in each year that I've been in business, and we're a merit shop operation. So I have both sides of the experience of this. I've worked underneath Davis-Bacon wage scales, and I worked in competition with them. But what Davis-Bacon does is it has rooted back in the early 1930s when there was a decision made by a couple of people from New York, both Republicans I might add, they let me down then before I was born, that they wanted to provide protectionism for their people in New York and lock out minorities that would be coming from the South to build federal buildings during that era of the Great Depression in New York. It remains the last vestige of Jim Crow laws that's designed to protect and lock out minorities from the construction industry as far as labor is concerned. My records on this is it costs a lot of money to have Davis-Bacon wage scales imposed. And our King construction records show over the years somewhere between 8 and 38% increase in the cost that we have to bid a project when we make the adjustment for Davis-Bacon. According to Beacon Hill, there's a 9 to 37% increase. I just simply use a 20% increase as a rule of thumb to discuss the amount of cost that's extra. So it's this. If we're going to have federally mandated union scale, that turns out to be the increase in price for every federal construction project that has $2,000 or more in it. The result of that is then that we're going to build only 4 miles of road instead of 5, only 4 bridges instead of 5, only 4 military facilities instead of 5, only 4 sets of barracks instead of 5, only 4 training facilities instead of 5. We can get 20% more production out of the dollars that we have and maintain the quality and maintain that sense of responsibility and have a trained workforce, and we can bring more trainees into the process, and we'll employ, according to the study I have in front of me here, an average of about 25,000 more minorities each year within the construction business that's there. What we have instead is we have some people that are in the industry that sit down once a year and they take a look at the records and they decide, well, let's pay a little bit more to the people here in labor because we don't want to compete outside of our particular industry. We'll raise these wages and we'll transfer that to the taxpayers. It is not a prevailing wage. It is a mandated union scale. That is the effect of it, Mr. Chairman. I have lived under this for at least 28 years that I operated King Construction. We're now in our about 38th or 39th year of business. We have deep experience with it, and the quality of the work does not suffer. Neither does the finishing, neither does the completion, neither does the bonding. All of this construction industry works better when you have real competition instead of some kind of mandated wage scale. And plus, eliminating the enforcement of Davis-Bacon wage scale, it brings efficiency in, and it brings competition in, and it makes it that it's an impossible and onerous federal regulation to seek to try to regulate. No one's can sit in government and can determine what a prevailing wage is. It upsets the relationship between management and workers, and I've been on both sides of that, on all 4 sides of it, as a matter of fact. It reduces the efficiency of the crews that are there because it reduces your ability to be flexible with the assignments of workforce and their flexibility to self-assign. For every possible financial reason, you cannot be fiscally responsible or a fiscal conservative and oppose this amendment, Mr. Chairman. It must be supported by a country that's going deeply in debt. We're borrowing over 40 cents out of every dollar that we spend. Meanwhile, we can save 20 cents out of every dollar in this Milcon appropriation bill simply by eliminating the enforcement of Davis-Bacon wage scale on this. So I urge, in the strongest terms possible, the adoption of this amendment, which would eliminate the effect of the last vestige of Jim Crow law with regard to military construction is concerned, save 20%, someplace between 9 and 37 according to Beacon Hill, and we can build 5 facilities instead of 4. And this is the right way to go to support my amendment. I urge its adoption, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Iowa yields back. Gentleman from Georgia seeks recognition.
Move strike the last word, and I rise.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition to the amendment. I respect my good friend, but I am totally baffled by the comparison to Davis-Bacon to Jim Crow laws. I think it's totally inapplicable. Davis-Bacon is a pretty simple concept, and it's a fair one. What the Davis-Bacon Act does is to protect the government as well as the workers. in carrying out the policy of paying decent wages on government contracts. The Act requires that workers on federally funded construction projects be paid no less than the wages paid in the community for similar work. It requires that every contract for construction to which the federal government is a party in excess of $2,000 contain a provision defining the minimum wages paid to various classes of laborers and mechanics. Mr. Chairman, the House has taken numerous votes on this issue, and on every vote this body has voted to maintain Davis-Bacon requirements. Last year, we avoided including divisive language like this, and it's my hope that we stop attacking the working class and defeat the amendment before us today and move on to more important matters. Davis-Bacon wages actually save construction costs. A study of more than 4,000 new schools, some built with prevailing wage and others not, found that there were no significant differences in construction costs associated with prevailing wage requirements. Repealing Davis-Bacon wages has consistently been shown to increase costs because the poor construction resulting in repairs, revisions, and project delays, and consequently substantial cost overruns, all as a result of the increase in employing unskilled, unqualified workers on projects. For example, when President Bush suspended Davis-Bacon wages during the Hurricane Katrina rebuilding efforts, construction costs went up due to the dramatic increase in the employment of unqualified workers. Opponents of the prevailing wage claim that the government could save billions by eliminating them, but they ignore how the Davis-Bacon Act has proven to increase workforce productivity and result in cost-effective projects. For example, a study of 10 states where nearly half of all highway and bridge work in America is done showed that when high-wage workers were paid double the wage of low-wage workers, they built 74.4 more miles of road bed and 32.8 more miles of bridges for $557 million less. Repealing Davis-Bacon wages dramatically decreases the economic benefits to the local community. Excuse me. For example, studies have shown that Davis-Bacon wages generate more than 2 times the amount spent on the construction project itself in the local community, since the workers spend part of their income in local businesses and pay local taxes, all of which recirculates throughout the economy. Driving wages down will not help to balance the federal budget. A flawed analysis, such as the Bluegrass Institute study, failed to take into account the spin-off economic benefits of maintaining prevailing wages. Davis-Bacon improves the skill level and the training of all of the workers. Opponents of prevailing wage regulations assume that repealing the law and lowering wages will not erode training nor lead to an exodus of skilled workers. They are wrong because it has that exact effect. Davis-Bacon increases training opportunities for all workers, both union and non-union. Finally, a Davis-Bacon wage is usually not a union wage. The Davis-Bacon prevailing wage is based on surveys of wages and benefits paid to various job classifications of construction workers in the community without regard to union membership. According to the Department of Labor, a whopping 72% of the prevailing wage rates issued in 2000 were based upon non-union wage rates. A union wage prevails only if the Department of Labor survey determines that the local union wage is paid to more than 50% of the workers in the job classifications. Let me just say that we have in the past avoided including divisive language in our bill, and it's my hope that we can stop attacking the working class and we can defeat this amendment. I urge all of the members in this House to vote no. Davis-Bacon is good law, it produces good results, and it is cost-effective for the taxpayers of the United States. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Purpose the gentlelady from New York seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
The Milcon VA bill should be one of the least controversial measures this committee considers. I am deeply disappointed that instead of seeking to pass the most bipartisan bill possible, some would prefer to weigh down the bill that funds veterans and military construction with divisive riders. Not only is this procedurally problematic, but it's completely wrong on substance. Repealing Davis-Bacon has consistently, as my colleague has shown, been shown to increase costs. Poor construction results in repairs, revisions, project delays, and cost overruns. Let's not add an unnecessary policy rider that will not be included in the final version. Again, this is probably one of the most bipartisan bills that we have considered, and I have applauded the chair and the ranking member for working so closely together to produce a really important bill that helps our veterans. Why weigh this down with this divisive rider? Let's vote against this amendment.
Gentlelady yield back.
I yield back.
Mr. Chairman. What purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition? The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of my colleague, Mr. King's amendment to H.R. 2216, the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Act. This amendment would ensure that no funds made available by H.R. 2216 could be used to implement, administer, or enforce the Davis-Bacon Act requirements for government contracts. Mr. Chairman, the Davis-Bacon Act is an anachronistic law that was enacted during the Great Depression to prevent wayfaring contractors from lowballing local construction bids. And in defense of my colleague, Mr. King's characterization, the sponsors of the Davis-Bacon Act originally intended for it to actually discriminate against non-unionized black workers in favor of white workers belonging to white-only unions. Mr. King is correct, and that's all in all deference to everyone in this debate, but this is indeed a vestigial remnant of the Jim Crow era and has no place in our military construction contracts and should be abandoned. Furthermore, the Davis-Bacon Act results in billions of wasted taxpayer dollars every year. This act requires federal construction contractors to pay their workers, quote, prevailing wages, which could be as much as 1.5 times greater than their basic pay rate. This results in artificially high costs of construction, which are ultimately shouldered by American taxpayers. Contractors wishing to offer a lower bid would still be required by law to pay their employees the prevailing wage and file a weekly report of the wages paid to each worker. This has a particularly negative effect on small businesses, as they are often unable to compete due to Davis-Bacon wage and benefit requirements, which reduces competition and further inflates contract rates. Moreover, Mr. Chairman, Davis-Bacon was enacted before the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act. According to the GAO, these acts have rendered Davis-Bacon obsolete and unnecessary. There are a number of laws passed by this body that protect construction workers without the discriminatory intent and effect of Davis-Bacon. During this time of fiscal austerity and responsibility, Congress must do all it can to lower federal contract costs and decrease the burden on American taxpayers. This amendment is intended to stop the hemorrhage of wasteful spending and rein in our debt. And I would urge my colleagues to support this amendment by Mr. King that would again ensure no funds made available by H.R. 2216 could be used to implement, administer, or enforce the wasteful Davis-Bacon Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Back is time. Gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from Georgia and the gentlelady from New York who spoke previously on this. And I rise in strong opposition to the gentleman from Iowa's amendment that would prevent Davis-Bacon from being enforced on projects under this act. It is a shame, I believe, that this funding bill, which provides needed facilities for our service members and benefits to our veterans, is being exploited to undermine hard-working Americans. But here we have it. Ironically, however, in contravention to what some of the things that have been said here on the floor under this amendment, Davis-Bacon requires that workers of every color and every gender be paid based on their work, not on the color of their skin, not on their gender. And that flies in the face of some of the accusations that have been put out for the original purpose of this. I do agree with the gentleman from Iowa that there were 2 Republicans who did originally sponsor this back in 1931, but I disagree that the danger, that the evil that it was trying to fight against back then has gone away. As a matter of fact, it is just a race to the bottom that would ensue if we got rid of Davis-Bacon. Like the gentleman from Iowa, I have worked on Davis-Bacon jobs. I was an iron worker for 18 years, very proud to work with the men and women of the building trades. And I've worked on jobs where some of the workers were union and some of the workers were non-union. But the important thing was that we were not exploited by trying to pit us against each other in a race to the bottom based on the wages that we earned. Since 1931, the Davis-Bacon Act has required federal contractors to provide workers the prevailing local wage. What happens is that's not the union wage, and in many cases, as the gentleman from Georgia has pointed out, it's the non-union wage. But it is determined by a survey of the Department of Labor of the wages in that area. The danger that it's meant to deal with is that in some areas of the country where there's no work and folks are dealing with a recession or a depression-like conditions in the construction industry, unscrupulous contractors can go down there where workers don't have any shot of going to work, and they can take them at very low wages and transport them to another area of the country that has work, and then depress the wage base in that area. That's what Davis-Bacon is meant to deal with, and that's still the situation that we have today and the danger that we guard against. On these federally funded construction projects, Davis-Bacon protects these workers by preventing wage exploitation while still ensuring that the value for the taxpayer dollar and work quality are not compromised. This amendment would bar funding to administer these wage requirements. Without Davis-Bacon protection, unscrupulous contractors will be free to exploit those tradesmen and women who, despite a slight recovery in their job numbers, still today face high levels of unemployment. Mr. Chairman, I want to speak for a moment about my time as an iron worker and my involvement with the men and women of the building trades. These people are incredibly hardworking, they are immensely skilled, and they work in a dangerous industry, and they truly care about their craftsmanship and the work they're dedicated to getting the job done and doing it right. Working side by side with them was a true honor for me. Generations of trades workers, by the sweat of their brow and the toil of their hands, built our great nation. They deserve our respect, as does the work that they do. Protecting Davis-Bacon does just that. The amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa will not create jobs. It will not house our military, and will certainly not result in better care and services for our veterans. All it will do is take away critical wage protections and open our workers to exploitation in a race to the bottom. I urge my colleagues to stand behind our American workers and stand behind our veterans and oppose this amendment. I thank my colleague for the opportunity to speak, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes, gentleman from Texas rise?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I rise in strong support of the gentleman's amendment. It's just common sense that the free market and competitive open bidding process is going to result in savings to taxpayers. And Davis-Bacon artificially drives up the cost to taxpayers at a time when we simply cannot afford it, with record debt, record deficit, at a time when all of us as stewards of the trade